Hello guys, this is your friend, What If Sing Short Stories, and this is What If Dick formed an agency with his classmates after defeating Awful. And now this is where the story starts. Chapter 11. As the inky blackness of the night was slowly ignited by the fiery hues of a new day, the first patrol of the Symbols of Peace Hero Agency returned home for a well-earned rest. After the excitement of the foiled bank heist the previous evening, criminal activity significantly slowed. In spite of this, Izuku's enthusiasm remained unabated. "What a night!" he exclaimed as they approached the agency. "Agreed." Iida removed his helmet. It was truly exhilarating to finally be able to dispense justice on behalf of the community. "You should dispense some justice on the one driver, Four Eyes," Kekken scoffed. He violated the city's traffic code and needed to be reprimanded to prevent further delinquency in the future. He rolled a stop sign at 3 a.m. on an empty street. Tokuyama calmly stated the facts of the incident. He barely needed a warning, let alone the lecture he received. "It's the principle of the matter," Iida huffed. "Well, I think it was an awesome night." Hagaku's cheerful voice was accentuated by the skipping her new jumpsuit was doing as she walked next to the group. "Even after the robbery, we were able to help out in a lot of little ways. It was a nice change of pace, you know. Right? It seems like we'd been dealing with one existential crisis after another since starting school." Rarika stretched her arms behind her head. It was nice to be able to help individuals instead of literally everyone all at once. "Exactly." Dick had been trying to place his finger on it all night, but Rarika finally summarized the emotions running through him. "I've been through so much over the last 4 years. Between All For One and my quirk, I had almost lost track of why I wanted to be a hero in the first place. Tonight brought it all back. Well, as much fun as the evening was, I need some rest." I'll hum about as he entered the building. "I need to make sure I'm ready to sparkle on my next patrol. Bensis, Messamus. I could use a little beauty rest myself." Hagaku yawned as she headed for her apartment. Iida and Tokuyama headed in that direction as well. "Well, I'm glad you all enjoyed yourselves." Mineta stormed toward the break room. "What's got you all worked up, dude?" Kirishima asked as he and the others followed him into the sitting area. Leather sofas and armchairs beckoned the heroes to take a load off their feet, while the kitchenette reminded them of their need for sustenance. "I put in all that work, and what do I have to show for it? Nothing. Not even a single phone number." Minato groused as he made his way to the refrigerator. "Take it easy, man," Kuminari tried to calm his friend. "We just hit the scene today. The people still have to get to know us. I'm sure things will change soon." "I don't want to hear it, Mr. Sure, I can jumpstart your car, you traitor." The diminutive hero nearly ripped the door off the refrigerator as he looked for a drink. "Those girls were all over you after you helped them. Were they now?" The group hadn't noticed Kyoka chatting with Melissa in some lounge chairs by a window overlooking the beach. She raised an eyebrow at Mineta's statement and shot a knowing smirk in her husband's direction. "Please, tell me more." "Don't worry," Kuminari said as he walked over and sat on the arm of her chair. "I told them I was already spoken for. Didn't even send one of them my way." Mineta slammed the fridge shut after finding a bottle of orange juice. "Some women you turned out to be. You know, Mineta, you might have more luck if you weren't so persistent." Melissa attempted to tactfully defuse the situation. "Don't try to force it. Just let things happen naturally." "Naturally? Huh. Have you seen my character design?" He gestured toward himself, accentuating his cartoonishly small proportions. "Girls would barely know I existed if I didn't make some noise. Such is my blessing and my curse." he sighed as he plopped down next to a coffee table. A collective shudder passed through that group as his words sank in for longer than they should have. "So, how was the rest of your patrol?" Melissa quickly tried to change the subject. "I hope I didn't miss too much after I signed off for the night." "It was pretty quiet, all things considered." Rerica smiled giddily as she found a bag of mochi snack bites in the pantry. "We actually spent a decent amount of time introducing ourselves to the local authorities and other night workers, just to let them know that we were here and ready to help. Yeah, but nothing came close to stopping the robbery." "That was awesome." Kirishima enthusiastically pumped his fist. Kekken let out a bemused grunt as he grabbed a protein shake from the fridge and turned to leave. "Come on, but Krugo. You can't tell me that this wasn't better than freelancing. The only difference here is that I know who I'm working with, so I don't have to figure out how to compensate for you extras," he said without looking back. He turned the corner and headed to his room without another word. Coming from him, I'm going to take that as a compliment, Kirishima shrugged. "Well, from what Melissa tells me, you guys were amazing last night." Kyoka praised the group. "No casualties, minimal damage, and you prevented a major tragedy at the shopping center. I really wish I could have been out there." "Well then get suited up, babe." Kuminari winked and gave her a thumbs up. "Once I get some shut-eye, I'll take over baby duty so you can get out there." "Are you sure? You had a really long night, and we both know how much of a handful Jin can be." "I've got this. Besides, you've been in full-time mommy mode since the day she was born. You've more than earned a break." Izuku sat in an armchair and watched his two friends. He was beginning to see what Rerica had been talking about on his first day back. Kuminari and Kyoka are in sync with everything. Not just their relationship, but their parenting responsibilities and their dreams as well. It's not the ideal situation for new heroes, but they're working together to make it work. His mind wandered to his own life. With the heavy responsibilities of One for All lifted from him and a clear path forward for the agency and All Might's legacy, he found himself thinking about his newly rediscovered personal life. What will I do when I'm not out there, actively being a hero? He glanced at Rerica, looking as pure as ever as she happily munched on her snack. Her face was aglow in the light of the rising sun, and a childlike gleam danced in her eyes. "Maybe a text message is here." The sound of All Might's voice and the accompanying vibration in his pocket interrupted Midoriya's thoughts. "That's adorable." Rerica squealed as she finished her mochi. Izuku felt a slight warmth rise to his cheeks as he took out his phone to check the message. "Sorry everyone, but I need to go," he excused himself as he stood up. "Mr. Raige has something important he wants to discuss at his office right away." As he quickly exited the break room and headed for the exit, he heard footsteps behind him. "Dick, wait." Rerica called after him. He turned to see a look of concern on her face that stopped him in his tracks. "It's a long trek to Karato City from here, even with flight. Are you sure that's the best idea after an all-night patrol? I appreciate the concern, but if Mr. Raige has anything that can help keep our agency growing, I have to go. Besides, after last night, I'm too excited to sleep." "Well, at least let me fly with you to keep you company," she said with as much determination and energy as she could muster, but it was clear that the events of the prior evening had worn her out. "Rerica, you went through a lot last night. You pushed yourself a lot harder than I had to." He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and smiled. "You need to get some rest and get your strength back." "I'll be fine." Rerica nodded in agreement, the appreciative grin on her face betrayed by the disappointment in her eyes. "Be safe up there, okay?" "I will be," Izuku said as he turned, walked out the front door, and took to the sky. Maybe I should have listened to Erica. Though he left the agency with a spring in his step, the solitary flight to the offices of Hannah Advertising reminded Midori of how tired he actually was. Just a quick nap would have been enough. Then maybe we could have flown together. It would have been nice to have someone to talk to. He shook his head. No, she went all out last night with that robbery and needs to recover. Besides, Mr. Raige said this was urgent. Everyone's been working so hard to get the agency started. I can't let a little fatigue jeopardize their efforts. Dick flipped his finger to gain some speed, a renewed determination carrying him the final stretch to his destination. As he approached the tower, Izuku could see that the rooftop entrance was open for him. He slowed to a stop and lowered himself into Kensetsu Raige's spacious office. Well, if it isn't the hero of the day. The wheelchair-bound advertising mogul enthusiastically rolled over to greet him. Glad you could make it on such short notice. I know you had a busy night. You already know about the robbery, Mr. Raige. First off, please, call me Ken. And second, are you kidding? Social media lit up almost immediately after you and your team swooped in. He gestured to one of the large, holographic displays behind him. The feed showed a host of posts, pictures, and videos showcasing the heroic deeds of the prior night. He enlarged two videos in particular. One showed cell phone footage of the moment that Ida, Erica, and he saved everybody from Tag's trap, and another depicted a multi-angle security feed that covered the destruction of the falling roadway and Change-Up's ultimate defeat. In the last 12 hours, these two videos have each almost reached the same number of views as the All-Might Industrial Fire video. How is that even possible? Izuku was taken aback. That video's been online since I was a kid. I probably contributed half of those views. People are looking for hope, Midoriya. Ken smiled at the young man. It seems your escapades last night have begun to fill that void. But we can't sit idly by and let this opportunity pass us by. What do you mean? Izuku followed as Ken motioned him toward the elevator. You and your agency have become an overnight success, but no one knows who you are yet, the publicist explained as the elevator began to descend. We need to act now while people are actively searching for who these new heroes are. Did you have something specific in mind? Well, that's why I wanted you to come in today. I've arranged a one-on-one interview for you, which will be filming at our in-house studio. You just need to introduce yourself, your agency, and your mission, and I can distribute it to the major news networks and social media. An interview. Midoriya felt the anxiety building in his chest. I'm not sure that's the best idea right now. I mean, I haven't gotten any sleep since my patrol ended, and I'm not the best at answering questions from complete strangers. Well, that's something you're going to need to get used to if you want to fill All Might's shoes, Ken said with a chuckle and an intense look from his icy eyes. However, I knew we'd need to ease you into it, so I arranged for someone that I believe you're familiar with. Wow, Izuku was interrupted by the elevator door opening. Standing on the walkway just outside was a tall, lanky man with wavy black hair. The large glasses that sat on his narrow face accentuated the mismatched pupils at the center of his blue eyes. Mr. Tokuda. Long time, no see, Izuku Midoriya, the freelance reporter, smiled at the young hero. How has the new symbol of peace been since I last saw you? I've been doing well, all things considered, he said as the two of them followed Ken down the walkway toward the studio. How have you been? A lot's happened since you visited the dorms. Tell me about it, Tokuda said with a tired laugh. There's been no shortage of scoops over the last few years. You gave me a scare though. Thought the book I'm writing about you was going to turn into a tragedy for a while. However, you managed to turn it around in the end. Sorry about that, Izuku said sheepishly. So you're interviewing me today? That's right, Tenio said with a wink. Ken thought a familiar face might help loosen you up a bit. Gotta make a good first impression. Ken, how did you know I knew Mr. Tokuda? Oh, Tenio did some reporting here when I opened up my building to help the struggling agencies. Ken stopped at a door and ushered them into the studio. By that time, All Might had already told me where his funds were going in the event of his death. So when we got to talking about the symbol of peace, your name naturally came up. After your heroics last night, Ken called me up to ask if I could do the interview. Tokuda's face brightened with an excited smile. I usually prefer to stay behind the camera, but I was not about to pass up the opportunity to be the first to officially interview All Might's successor. And with the pleasantries out of the way, let's get this interview started. Ken enthusiastically motioned for the staff to get the two ready for filming. The makeup crew made sure Izuku looked presentable, eliminating any signs of fatigue from the night before. Then the staging crew sat him down in an armchair across from Mr. Tokuda. A panoramic view of the city skyline served as the backdrop for the interview. Ken wheeled in behind the camera crew. All right, we just need a few minutes of solid footage. Just the general information and introductions, some details about last night. Let the people know that you were there for them. Ready? Wait. We're starting now. No preview of the questions. No warm-up. Izuku's head was still spinning from the whirlwind of information and events that he had been hit with upon arriving. Ken, I'm not sure I'm ready for this. Midoriya, you'll be fine, Ken said with a reassuring smile. This is the first step toward your goal of keeping All Might's legacy alive. You just need to relax. Midoriya inhaled deeply, and as he exhaled, he felt some of the nervousness wash away. He took a few more meditative breaths. All Might, you got me to where I am today. I won't let you down. He felt uncharacteristically calm as he emptied his lungs one last time, the tension completely gone. He gave Ken a nod to proceed. And action. Hello, I'm freelance reporter Tenio Tokuda. As I'm sure many of you are aware, a new team of heroes arrived on the scene last night and stopped what could have been a major catastrophe. You've no doubt seen the viral videos, but it's my great honor to introduce the leader of these up-and-coming heroes to you now. Tokuda turned from the cameras and looked at Midoriya. Young man, please introduce yourself to the public. My name is Izuku Midoriya, but my hero name is Dig. Izuku Midoriya. Some of our viewers might recognize that name from your unconventional win at the beginning of the UA Sports Festival a few years ago. Yeah, that was me, Dick said with modest embarrassment. That's a trick down memory lane. So you attended UA then? What was that like for you? It was an incredible experience. The program is great, the facilities are amazing, but the highlight for me was being able to learn from great heroes like Eraserhead, Midnight, and even All Might himself. That's actually something I wanted to touch on, Tenio interjected. You and your class were some of the last people to directly interact with the late hero prior to his retirement. My sources say that he took a particular interest in you, Dick. Would you care to expound on that? All Might was a wonderful mentor. When he found out that I had a power-based quirk similar to his, he took me under his wing to help me get a handle on it. Dick chose his words carefully. Unlike his friends, the general public was still not aware of the truth behind One for All. It sounds like you have a great deal of respect for the symbol of peace. He was an inspiration to me all throughout my childhood, and my time at UA really took that to another level. His impact on my life is one of the main reasons I started the Symbols of Peace Hero Agency. to carry on his legacy after his passing. Which brings us to the reason we're here today, the freelancer sub to the next topic. Could you tell us a little about your agency? Well, as I said, I founded the agency to honor All Might. It's a close-knit team composed of my classmates. Ah, yes. The infamous Class 1A. You guys made quite a few headlines during your time in school. We had more than the usual amount of on-the-job training, that's for sure, Izuku chuckled. But it's those trials that strengthened our skills and our bond. I can't think of a better group of people to be working with. You certainly showed off those skills during last night's events. How about you introduce us to some of the heroes from these videos? Dick spent the next few minutes praising the efforts of his team. It felt good to be giving them some time in the spotlight, even if they were unable to do it themselves. He glanced over at Ken, who was sitting thoughtfully behind the camera crews. He looked intensely focused on the content of the interview. He's probably brainstorming marketing strategies. Well, Dick, it looks like you and the Symbols of Peace Hero Agency are off to a good start. You're ready to protect the public and keep evil at bay. Before I let you go, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you a question that is likely on our audience's minds. The reporter's face took on a serious look. Over the last few years, the public has been let down by the heroes. Dark secrets of popular prose such as Endeavor and Hawks have shaken their faith in heroes in general. The ease with which All For One and the League of Villains disrupted our way of life was a shock to everyone and showcased how fragile our society is. I know what you mean, Dick said as the memories came flooding back. Even as students, we were thrown headlong into the fray. We were all tasked with helping restore order. And while order has been restored, peace of mind has remained somewhat elusive. The secrecy of the Hero Public Safety Commission surrounding the alleged defeat of All For One has not helped quell the disquiet in people's hearts. Now, don't take this the wrong way, but what are you and your team, a group of young heroes fresh out of high school, bringing to the table? The public has already been burned by seasoned pros. Why should the people trust you? Dick was caught off guard by the sudden shift in tone of the interview. It was a valid question, to be sure. The country had been through a lot in the last few years, and hero society was only starting to recover. What can I say to put the public at ease? A thought latched on in his head and wouldn't let go. This was it. Everything that had happened over the last 4 years had led to this moment. Because we brought down the League of Villains. Because I defeated All For One. Dick took a deep breath. There was no going back now. Because I'm here. Chapter 12. What on earth were you thinking, Izuku Midoriya? As soon as the interview with Mr. Tokuda had finished, Ken rushed the footage throughout editing and distributed it to the major news networks. It aired during the primetime news slots, while Ken synchronized a social media drop at the same time. Any other news that evening became completely irrelevant. Midoriya's revelation concerning the defeat of All For One received wall-to-wall coverage, and by the next morning, Dick was a household name. Not all of it was entirely positive, however, as a large percentage of the population demanded proof of the claims. They had been misled by their heroes before, so the skepticism was understandable. This public outcry prompted the Hero Public Safety Commission to send a representative to the Symbols of Peace Hero Agency. As the late afternoon sun filtered through the slanted blinds of one of the building's conference rooms, the young hero found himself sitting across from a very tired and very overwhelmed Yukmarinreda. Do you have any ideas how much work this little stunt of yours has created? The man rubbed his eyes and furrowed his brow. I'm not going to be able to sleep for the next month. I'm sorry, Mr. Murata, but I felt the public needed to know the truth. Izuku sympathized with the overworked representative's plight, but he stood by his words. How is the public supposed to trust us if we're not honest with them? The situation is delicate. This isn't like the Stain incident where we had to hide your involvement because you acted in an unauthorized capacity. Red ran his hands through his hair in frustration. I know. You kept the all-for-one evidence classified to protect us. Midoriya had heard this explanation before. You didn't want a group of high school students to be at the center of a media feeding frenzy. You wanted us to be able to finish our schooling uninterrupted and to have a chance to recover in peace. As it concerns you and your friends, yes, but it goes deeper than that. Moretta looked intently at the young hero. After Yek, we lost a lot of good heroes. Many died, even more were injured to the point of being unable to return to regular duty. Half of what was left retired, and the remainder was tainted by scandal and skepticism. Our society was hanging by a thread, and we were doing everything we could to keep even a fragment of the public's faith in heroes alive. Thanks to All Might's cooperation with Hawks, we knew that One for All was our best shot at defeating All for One. Everyone, the Commission and pro-heroes alike, did what they could to maintain order and stop the spread of evil, but, at the end of the day, we had secretly pinned all of our hopes on you. That being said, if the public found out that not even the pros had faith in themselves, and that everything was riding on one high school student, Izuku began to understand the predicament. Society could have come apart at the seams. Many more civilian lives could have been lost by them taking matters into their own hands. The aftermath of the conflict could have been infinitely worse than it ended up being. Don't get me wrong. We are all eternally indebted to you and your friends for what you did, but you have to understand the bigger picture we had to deal with. I completely understand why the Commission did what they did. It's just... Midoriya sighed, sending a few dust particles dancing through beams of yellow sunlight. We've done so much already, but, with all the details under lock and key, it feels like we're starting at square one. It was never our intention to keep it hidden forever. We just wanted to wait until you all were more established as heroes. Rest's sympathetic tone carried a twinge of annoyance. Your viral interview yesterday just caught us off guard. Now everyone wants us to verify your claims, and the amount of evidence we have to filter through for classified information is not insignificant. I don't need to remind you of the media uproar that the mere mention of One for All caused after Yek. Your quirk was the centerpiece of the All for One conflict. We'll be lucky to have any evidence left after we redact everything. It was Midoriya's turn to ruffle his hair in exasperation. This is going to be a long one. I hope the shift change is going well for the others. To the average person, it might seem like the greatest threat of criminal activity would occur at night, where one can disappear into the shadows. However, the time of day that required the most hero presence was a late afternoon. The predictable influx of people getting off work, children finishing their school day, and families heading into town for the evening created an environment which allowed criminals to perpetrate their schemes unnoticed amid the hustle and bustle. The densely packed populace also made it a tempting target for the more chaotic breed of villain. To better mitigate these threats, the symbols of Peace Hero Agency scheduled their shifts to overlap at this critical time, doubling their presence on the streets. And so I used my acid to melt the bottoms of his shoes. Ashido excitedly told Rarika and Bida about her favorite incident from the day. Well, he starts freaking out and trying to get them off, and Freppy used her tongue to trick him into a trashing. You should have seen the look on his face. He'll think twice before he pickpockets again, Ribbit. Sue smiled with satisfaction. Using the environment to take advantage of a timely distraction. Excellent work, you two. The girls giggled at Ida's earnest enthusiasm. As they continued their patrol, they passed by a large video display with the news on it. The report was discussing Dick's interview from the night before as well as the calls for transparency from the government. Rerica remembered the look on Mr. Mrez's face as they crossed paths at the agency's entrance. "I wonder how Dick's doing right now," she thought out loud. "Where's he, anyway?" Sue asked her friend. "He usually checks in with everybody over the intercoms by now, Ribbit." Mr. Mrez from the Hero Public Safety Commission came over to discuss the fallout from his interview as we were leaving. Ida informed the two daytime heroes. Hopefully the meeting doesn't take much longer. Ichako could still see the disappointed look on his face as she left the office. "I know how much he enjoys being out here." Ribbit, Ashita nudged her arm. "I'm sure that's the only reason you wanted to end quickly." Rerica felt her cheeks begin to warm up. "WWM?" Her response was cut short by the sound of screams coming through her earpiece. "We've got a situation here." Sato's voice sounded panicked. "What's going on, Sugarman?" Melissa chimed in from the control room. Anima and I were getting grape juice and cellophane up to speed when, all of a sudden, a man crumpled to the ground and started screaming. When we went to check on him, 3 more people did the same thing across the street. "We're heading to investigate some more screams from a few blocks over," Sarah said through heavy breaths. As the commuter train passed overhead on its way to the station, Rerica and Ida prepared to head towards the incident in progress. Suddenly, over the noise of the passing train, the 4 heard a cry ring out in their area. As they scanned for the source, they found an older woman convulsing on the ground, screaming in terror. Another scream rang out up the road as Sue's quick reflexes prevented yet another victim from collapsing into oncoming traffic. Ida darted off to prevent an affected cyclist from meeting a similar fate. The sound of screeching tires and scraping metal could be heard over the intercoms. "No, no, 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 no. Critty, what's wrong?" Melissa shouted. A delivery truck driver just lost control and plowed a civilian vehicle into the side of a building at full speed. "I think I saw children in the back." Yaya's audibly gasped, followed by a moment of shocked silence. The drivers. The passengers. They're all. Ichako's eyes grew wide as she heard more screams through the earpieces of her teammates that were spread across the city. "What is happening?" "Aegis, if there's anyone left at the agency, we need them now." Todoroki's normally calm voice was filled with tension. "Whatever this is, we're spread too thin to effectively deal with it. Sounding the all-hands alarm right now." Ichako scanned the area in search of more victims in need of help. Her eyes were temporarily drawn back to the news report across the street, a clip of last night's interview on the display. "Please hurry, Dick." As the Evening Express arrived in Tatooine Station, so did the chaos that had been unfolding across the city. Everywhere, people were lying on the ground, crying out in fear. Others tried to help them, but to no avail. More screams joined these as the train doors opened. Panicked passengers poured off the train to escape whatever was causing this horrifying phenomena. A young lady was among these passengers. She maneuvered through the crowds and made her way to a vacant phone booth, closing the door and dulling the roar of the pandemonium around her. She pulled out her phone, entered a very specific set of inputs, and waited patiently as the encrypted connection was made. After a few moments, the other end picked up. "How are things proceeding?" inquired a distorted voice. "Well, I know they say that commuting can be a nightmare, but this is a bit much," the young woman replied with a satisfied smirk. She cracked open the door to the booth so her employer could hear the terrifying ambience. "Excellent. You've been busy." "Yeah, taking the train helped spread things out a bit." The girl was glad that a nightmare-inducing quirk had a relatively wide range. This job would have been a lot more challenging if I had to hoof it the whole time. Be sure to keep your guard up, the voice on the other end of the line cautioned. The heroes will be on high alert now. Yeah, I know the plan. I blend right in. You have nothing to worry about. I hope so, for your Saka. I would hate for you to share your brother's fate. At her employer's words, she found herself unable to speak as a sudden, sharp pain developed in her head. The young lady's eyes grew wide with fear. Don't fail me, Ellington. And with that, the encrypted call ended. She gasped in relief as the pain dissipated. She quickly regained her composure and stepped out of the phone booth. Time to get to work. Chapter 13. The steady flow of time brought on the dark chill of a winter's evening faster than the heroes had expected. The terrifying phenomenon had affected much of the city's infrastructure in a short period of time. The trains were out of commission due to infected operators, numerous vehicular accidents kept traffic backed up, and emergency response personnel found themselves under the influence of the panic plague. All of these factors left a multitude of fearful and disgruntled citizens stranded in the city with no way out. Though the number of new cases had slowed since the initial outbreak, all those affected were still trapped in fear's clutches, screaming in terror as they awaited medical aid. Because paramedics were unable to reach the victims in a timely manner, however, the heroes of the Symbols of Peace worked tirelessly to bring the victims to them. While this effort was underway, Dick and her phone Jack were in pursuit of the source of the chaos. Thanks again for being willing to help tonight, Midoriya said apologetically to her as they maneuvered through the restless crowds. Don't thank me. If it weren't for Denki, I'd still be watching Jid. She couldn't help but smile. Even after working all night and barely getting any rest due to their daughter's antics, her husband still enthusiastically sent her off to help the cause. That it never ceases to amaze me. Well, in any case, having you and your quirk here's going to be a big help in tracking down whatever is causing all of this, Midoriya continued, bringing her back to the task at hand. If we can get any solid leads. Kyoka stopped and shot her jacks into the ground to check for anything unusual. These crowds are making it really difficult to get a clear reading, and the rate of the incidents has dropped a lot. Not that I want it to happen, but without another panic attack, we might not be able to wait. She listened intently as the vibrations traveling through that ground came into focus. Jinxed hit. Got another victim 2 blocks south and 5 west. Hang on tight. Dick suddenly called out as he leapt into the air. Kyoka felt a tendril of his black whip wrap around her waist as she was dragged upward with him. She reached out and grabbed onto the crackling black cord to steady herself. I know this is the fastest way to get over there, but a little warning would have been nice. She yelled over the rush of the wind. Midoriya remained unresponsive as he focused on arriving at the latest incident quickly and safely. As soon as Kyoka's feet touched the ground, Blackwood released her, and the two heroes rushed to the aid of the elderly gentleman convulsing in the middle of the crosswalk. She quickly checked the man's vital signs. He needs immediate medical attention. At his age, this amount of stress could send him into cardiac arrest if he's not sedated. I'll call for help. You see if you can find any leads. Dick began carefully moving the victim to safety while Kyoka focused on the vibrations her jacks were picking up. The chaotic mass of sound waves that reached her painted a fairly substantial picture of the surrounding area. People in the immediate vicinity were either standing in concern or running away in panic. The further out from the incident, the more things returned to the status quo for the evening. As with all the other checks, Kyoka found the population to be uniformly aggravated and upset. She was about to give up when she picked up an anomaly at the edge of her range. One person, female judging by the footsteps. Completely distracted by her phone. But what's this weird echo I'm picking up? She removed her earpiece to eliminate the extra noise of Dick calling for assistance over the intercom. This is weird. I'm still hearing everything he's saying twice. It's almost like... Kyoko suddenly understood what was happening. She began searching the area until she found what she was looking for, a security camera. She locked eyes with the lens, smiled, and waited at whoever might be watching. Almost instantly, the anomalous echo stopped, and the footsteps she'd been tracking sped up and ran out of range. I think I've got a lead. Kyoko jumped to her feet and filled Midoriya in on what she had discovered. So the echo he heard was feedback from the security feed. She must have been watching it on her phone. But why would she be watching that security camera right at this moment? Unless... Midoriya's brow furrowed. Kyoko could see that he was solving the riddle faster than she could. What if she's the one causing the panic attacks? Like, with her quirk? Yes. What if it's a special variant that's not limited by proximity? Maybe she can activate it visually. Midoriya sounded more and more convinced of the theory. That would explain why she was watching this feed right when a new incident occurred, and why we haven't found anything suspicious at any of the other sites. You do realize how far-fetched that sounds, right? Kyoko asked with a healthy amount of skepticism. It's all we have to go on right now. At that moment, Shoji arrived on the scene. Heard you found another one, he said as he gently scooped up the terrified old man. I'll get him to a medic. You guys focus on ending this nightmare. Without another word, the multi-armed hero rushed off. Where was our mystery woman's last location? Dick asked, determination filling his voice. On the other side of town, due east from here. She ran out of range pretty quickly, so I'm not sure which direction she... Before Kyoko had time to finish the sentence, she found herself being carried into the sky once more. Warning, Dick. Oh, never mind. I can't believe I was so careless. Erendon ran for the safety of the crowded sidewalks. As she disappeared into the frustrated throngs of pedestrians, she began to walk with a bit of a limp. I hope that's enough to keep that earphone girl from singling me out. The night had been going smoothly up until now. Her quirk allowed her to affect people based on line of sight. If she could see a person, she could dredge up their darkest fears and manifest them into a terrifying nightmare, regardless of proximity or physical presence, although those factors did affect her quirk's potency. In another life, this would have been very effective against villains, but entrance exam robots don't have fears. The plan was a stroke of genius. Riding in on the commuter train provided her with the ideal vantage point for creating random and widespread chaos, and accessing the city's network of traffic cameras allowed her to target areas that had a high likelihood of producing collateral damage to keep the heroes busy. As for the why, she didn't ask questions. Under normal circumstances, I would have pressed the issue, but after what happened to my brother... Erendon's mind wandered as she thought of her older brother, how he took her in when the hero thing didn't work out, how he let her fly along on his jobs, and how all of that changed when he started working for the current employer. And now he's gone. A streak of green flew across the sky, bringing Erendon back to the problem at hand. No. Not yet. She was so focused on blending in that she had forgotten to calm her racing heart. It's only a matter of time before they find me. Unless... Look. It's Dick. She feigned excitement as she directed people's attention to the descending heroes. The crowd ran to greet them as they landed, excited to meet the overnight sensation. Erendon joined them, hoping to cause one last distraction. It's a shame that I can only hit one person every 10 seconds, but hopefully this will cause enough confusion to let me disappear. As the crowd swarmed around the two heroes, she grabbed her phone and held it over her head to get a better view. Smiled for the camera, earphone jack. Let's see what you're afraid of. As the pair landed at the suspect's last known location, they were suddenly surrounded by a crowd of excited civilians. Kyoka went to work listening for the woman, but all she could hear were calls for autographs and selfies with Dig. Your fans aren't making my job very easy. Keep trying. His face was flushed with embarrassment. Every second counts. We can't let her. A pained look crossed his face as he began frantically scanning the crowd. Kyoka watched as Dick swiftly moved in front of her and pointed into the throng of fans. There. Kyoka tuned out the rest of the world and focused in the direction Midoriya had indicated. She heard the footsteps of a young woman turning and running away from the crowd. Move! The hero yelled to the crowd as she plugged her jacks into the amplifiers on her wrists. As the sea of people parted, she took aim at the suspect and channeled her heartbeat into the imps. A directed sound wave launched out of the devices and slammed into the escapee's back, knocking her into a wall and rendering her unconscious. Thanks, Dick. I don't know how you knew, but I never would have found her without. As Kyoka turned to thank her friend, she was dismayed to find him crumpled on the ground. His face was pale and sweaty, his body trembled violently, and although he was silent, the horrified look in his wide-open eyes said everything. She tried to stabilize his spasming body but quickly realized that this was much more severe than the previous cases. Midoriya may have shielded her from the effects of the quirk, but panic began to set in nonetheless. I need help at my position ASAP. She yelled into the earpiece. Earphone jack. What's wrong? Melissa's concerned voice responded immediately. Dick's down. Kyoka's voice cracked as the words left her mouth. Dick's down. Chapter 14. Midoriya woke with a start. He could feel his heart pounding as his eyes adjusted to the dark and unfamiliar room he found himself in. Before he had a chance to calm down, he felt a hand grab his shoulder. He reflexively pulled away, his panicked breaths getting closer together. SHHH. It's okay, Dick. It's me. Dick squinted to see a figure, illuminated only by the blue glow from a computer monitor. Melissa. Dick wanted to feel relieved, but there was too much to process. He could hear the steady beeping of heart rate monitors, and could feel the odd sensation of the four in his arm. Where am I? What happened? You're in the infirmary at the agency building, Melissa replied as she began checking his vitals. I need you to take a deep breath and tell me what you remember. Z. We were following a lead on the cause of the panic attacks. A crowd surrounded us, and my danger sense went off. I located the suspect and moved in front of earphone jack. Kyoka. He could hear the beeping intensify as his heart rate spiked. Is she okay? Was she affected? Calm down, Melissa soothed him. Kyoka's fine. You must have taken the hit for her. She was able to apprehend the culprit. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief as he laid back in the bed. You've been out for 2 days though. 2 days. How? From what we've been able to gather from quirk records and anecdotal evidence from the other victims, the potency of the panic attack is related to proximity and focus. Melissa grabbed Dick a small glass of water which he gladly accepted. Victims that arrived on the commuter train were affected for significantly longer than those on the streets. You've been the worst by far. She was probably aiming for Kyoka to hinder your progress in tracking her, but your reflexes intervened. As soon as I pointed her out to Kyoka, I seized up. Dick tried recalling what happened over the course of the last 2 days. I want to say that I blacked out, but my mind never stopped. I don't remember all the details, but I remember feeling terrified, helpless, trapped, almost like. A shiver passed through his body. Melissa let out a concerned sigh. Almost like the nightmares you had while you were in recovery. Her words brought a lot of painful memories back to Midoriya's mind. You haven't exactly been quiet the last 2 days, and knowing what we now know about this villain's quirk hasn't eased my concerns. What do you mean? Her quirk works by manifesting a person's deepest fears as a vivid nightmare, instantly incapacitating them as they struggle to overcome it. Judging from what I could make out from your feverish ramblings, what she got from you were your memories of the day. The final battle with All For One. Dick felt a heaviness in his heart at the mere thought of that confrontation. For a few moments, only the sound of medical equipment prevented the silence from being complete. Dick. Melissa placed her hand on his. You did everything that you could. It's not your fault. Midoriya breathed deeply. He set his jaw as he focused on holding back the sadness threatening to erupt from his eyes. You can't keep going like this, Melissa said in a mixture of frustration and compassion. It's not healthy for you to keep all of that emotion bottled up. The only reason you opened up to me was because I was trying to help your recovery, but you would have kept this pain hidden from everyone if you had a choice. That's honestly one of the reasons I was so quick to go along with your hero agency idea. I figured, if you were around your friends, the emotional healing would be able to start in full. However, it seems like you've repressed the pain even further, covering it with excitement and optimism. I smiled to trick the fear inside me. That's what All Might always said, Izuku whispered solemnly. This is my burden. I don't want anyone else to have to carry it. Well, whether you let them or not, some of them are already trying. Melissa turned and looked to the corner of the room. As Dick followed her gaze, he saw another figure curled up on a small cot. The blanket draped over the body slowly rose and fell with the heavy breathing of sleep. A gloved hand clutched the blanket close to a face framed by brown hair. Rarika? Dick asked with quiet concern. She brought you in when Kyoko radioed for help. Melissa smiled sadly at the girl. If I hadn't forced her to eat and change out of her costume, she wouldn't have left your side. Said she wanted to be here for you when you woke up this time. Midoriya sighed heavily as he watched his sleeping friend. He thought back through everything he'd been through up until this point. Every hour of solitary training, every self-endangering moment of sacrifice, every near-death experience. It had all been for their good, to protect his friend so that they could achieve their dreams without unnecessary worries. The responsibilities of training, schoolwork, and the escalating threats they had faced forced everyone to keep their game face on. Now, however, all of those external pressures were removed, and as he looked at the resting form of the girl that had impacted his life so much, a pang of guilt grasped at his heart. What have I put you through these last 4 years? I can't force you to do anything before you're ready, Melissa quietly broke through his thoughts. Let me just say this. This isn't a fight you're going to be able to win on your own. They all trust you to help them with their struggles. You need to trust them to help you with yours. Izuku was about to respond when a commotion in the hallway broke the silence. The door suddenly slammed open, causing a very startled Rarika to fall out of her cot. Kekken stormed into the room and glared at Dick, fierce determination in his eyes. Nap time's over, loser, he said gruffly. The police want us to help interrogate this nightmare scumbag. I'm taking Earsden down now, and you're coming with us. I have a name, you know. Kyoko poked her head through the doorway. Kyoko. A relieved smile spread across Midoriya's face. I'm glad to see you're not hurt. Good job catching the villain. Well, like I said, your danger sense made it possible. Although I guess you didn't hear that compliment the first time." Her face shifted to one of concern. "You gave us quite a scare. You doing okay?" "Why yeah. Doing well, all things considered," Dick smiled. His ears picked up a small, frustrated hut from Melissa as she turned to start removing the monitors from him. "We haven't got all day, Dick," Kekin shouted impatiently. "Get your costume on before I drag you downtown." A phone call is here. Dick's phone rattled and rang on the side table next to the bed. He quickly picked it up to see who was calling. "Ken." He answered the call on speakerphone. "Midoriya. Hope I didn't catch you at a bad time." Ken's energetic voice sounded from the other end of the connection. "Actually, I was just about to head over to my office. I hope. I've got the interview all set up." "Interview? Ken, you're not making any sense. What's going on?" "Oh, you must have been working when it dropped. My apologies." Dick heard a dissatisfied snort from Kekin. "Last night, the Public Safety Commission released security footage of your battle with All For One. The audio was removed and some of the video is unclear, so everyone is clamoring for an explanation. I took the liberty of setting up an interview here at the office tonight. Get a first-hand perspective of the events, you know." Dick looked around the room. Most of the faces showed varying degrees of concern, with the exception of Kekin, whose typical disgust was as prominent as ever. "Ken, I want to help, but we're in the middle of wrapping up this panic-plagued incident, and I'm sure your team can handle it. They're quite capable. You're the only one that can handle this interview, and it needs to happen tonight. I'll see you soon." And with that, the call ended. Midoriya sat, overwhelmed by the wave of information that had been bombarding him since waking up. "I guess you guys will have to handle the interrogation without me," he finally said after a few moments of processing. "Oh no you don't, Dick." Kekin slammed his fist into the wall. "You don't get to take the easy road to the #1 slot while I do all your dirty work for you. Give him a break." "Bakugo," Kyoka scolded. "He just jumped in front of a villain and put himself in a 48-hour nightmare. I'd hardly call it the easy road. Besides, wasn't it your idea to hire a publicist in the first place?" Rariko chimed in, clearly annoyed by Kekin's lack of empathy. "Yeah, one that works for us, round face, not the other way around." Kekin turned to look Dick in the eye. "Looks like he's got you on a pretty short leash already, nerd." "It's not like that, Kekin," Midoriya defended himself. "The public needs to be able to trust us. They need answers, and they're not going to accept them from someone who wasn't there." He flinched as his explosive friend got right in his face. "You weren't the only one who was there, Dick." The quiet seriousness of his voice carried more weight than his usual bombastic tone. "Or have you forgotten why you're even here right now?" Izuku looked his rival dead in the eye. "I haven't," he replied grimly. Good Kekin turned toward the door, pushing past Kyoka on his way out. "Come on, ears. We've got work to do. For the love of..." She sighed in frustration before turning to look apologetically at Midoriya. "Glad to see you're doing better. Thank you again. Don't mention it." He waved as she left to catch up to Kekin. As his eyes drifted from the doorway, they met Rariko's concerned gaze. He mustered a smile to try to alleviate her worry. "How are you doing, Rariko?" "Me. You're the one that's been unconscious for the last 2 days. I should be asking you. I'm doing a lot better thanks to you." He was smiling sincerely now. "Oh, it was nothing." She nervously waved off the praise. I was the first one on the scene, and your condition wasn't looking good, so I just rushed you back here as fast as possible. You did more than that." He gestured to the cot in the corner. "It means a lot to know I had your support the whole time. Come on, Dick." She gave a small chuckle as her cheeks grew redder than usual. "You know you always have my support, whether I'm here or not." Melissa quietly cleared her throat and shot him a quick glance as she leaned over to unhook the four from his arm. As soon as Midoriya was free from the medical contraptions, he swung his legs off the bed, ready to grab his gear and get headed over to Hannah Advertising. "Not so fast, Dick." Melissa stopped him. "Not you too." Izuku couldn't hide his agitation at the impending delay. "I'm not saying I agree with Bakugo, but you should be taking it easy," she retorted. "You've been through a lot, and you're still not at 100% yet." "But the interview can be rescheduled. You're not in a state to make that trip all by yourself. I know this is important to you, but you're not doing anyone any good if you don't take care of yourself." Melissa didn't sound like she was going to budge on the issue. Midoriya hung his head in frustration as he prepared to call Ken back. "What if I flew along with him?" Rarika spoke up. "I can keep an eye on him to make sure he doesn't ever quit, and he can still fulfill his obligations." Melissa thought for a second. "We still don't know all the details about this panic quirk and its effects. That's my main concern. The last thing we need is for you to relapse in my day and fall to your death. If you're not alone, that gives me a little more peace of mind about it." Izuku looked between the two concerned faces of his closest friends. "Rarika, I can't ask you to. This is important to you, Dick, and to the world. Let me help you this time." Her eyes glistened with the same heartfelt sincerity that her voice conveyed. "If you're sure," Midoriya finally said. "But we need to get moving if we want to make it in time for the interview." "Well, I'm not the one still sitting on the hospital bed," she said playfully as she darted out of the room to get suited up. As Izuku got up to follow her, he turned and looked at Melissa, who gave him a small smile. "Whenever you're ready, let them help you," she said kindly. Midoriya nodded as he turned to get ready for the trip to Raige's office. It was a bright, crisp afternoon as the two heroes flew above the white landscape on their way to Kyoto City. "That's typical," Dick chuckled to Rarika over the intercom. "I go into a coma for 2 days, and I missed the first snow of the season." "If it's any consolation, I missed it too," she responded, watching the blanketed fields rush beneath her. "It was a pleasant surprise though. The view of it all from up here's really pretty." "Yeah, it really is." Dick's voice sounded a little distracted. Ichako turned to see his eyes looking towards her instead of at the passing scenery. He quickly wrenched his head forward, a flustered blush covering his face. She smiled to herself as she felt her own cheeks begin to heat up. As they made a beeline for the advertising agency, Rarika became lost in thought. "I've wanted something like this for so long. Just the two of us, free to talk with no distractions. And yet..." She turned again to look at her friend. She could see his eyes, the same distant eyes she had seen countless times since Yek. "I know a lot happened in the last 2 years of school, and because of One for All, Dick had a lot more on him than the rest of us. But we overcame the obstacles, and there's a bright future ahead of us. So why does it feel like he's still carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders? It can't just be All Might's legacy, can it?" Ichako thought back to what Melissa had said to her the night Dick went to recruit the Cougar for the agency. "This agency, and working alongside you guys specifically, is going to be just as much a part of Dick's recovery as the last year on Island." "What do you mean?" Ichako had asked with a little confusion. "I can't go into all the details, but he went through a lot during that final battle, more than he lets on. If he's ever going to fully heal, he needs to open up about it. When the time comes, he's going to need the support of someone he trusts. Ichako's gaze continued to linger on the troubled hero beside her as the cold air of the flight whipped past them. She suddenly found those distant eyes looking back into hers, but she didn't turn away. I'm going to be there for him, no matter what. A few more moments passed before Dick looked forward. Oh. There it is. Rerica looked ahead to see their destination before them. Corrado looked a lot like Musutuf in a lot of ways, but one thing set it apart. At the far end of the city, towering above the skyline, was a giant glass spire. It shimmered in the afternoon sun, and the snowy scene surrounding it only made it gleam brighter. Ichako found herself at a loss for words. Come on, Ken is probably waiting in his office. Dick sped towards the top of the skyscraper, as Rerica followed close behind. A circular entrance at the top of the building granted them reprieve from the cold as they descended to the floor of the enormous office. Welcome back, Midoriya. A sharp-dressed man in a wheelchair rolled over to them from a desk at the far side of the room. As the rooftop entry closed, a slight downdraft ruffled his white hair. He smiled jovially at the two. It's a bit chilly out there. You and your friend should take a minute to warm up before we get ready for the interview. Oh. Where are my manners? Dick exclaimed. Rerica, this is Kunsetsu Raige, our brand manager. And Ken, this is Ichako Rerica, also known as the Zero-Gravity Hero, Gravity. It's a pleasure to meet you in person. Raige reached out to shake her hand, which she politely returned. Your efforts with that robbery were quite impressive. It was nothing, really. She rubbed the back of her head modestly. Just doing my job. And mine too. He laughed. Honestly, your team has been making waves faster than I can keep up with. It makes my job easy with getting your names out there, but the public has a very short attention span. It won't be long before another viral sensation pulls them away. That's why I try to play the long game. The long game? Ichako asked. Yes, something that will stick with people long after the novelty of an individual event is worn off. Take All Might, for example. He arrived on the scene and started handling incidents at breakneck speed. The public didn't have a chance to move on, and eventually, the lower crime rate was attributed to him. He became the symbol of peace in the minds of the people, and that reputation ultimately still stands to this day. In our situation, we're not going to be able to make a name for ourselves in sheer numbers alone, Dick added. With All For One and the lead gone, crime has dropped to all-time low numbers, which is a good thing, but it doesn't help our visibility. I don't know, Ichako said thoughtfully. It doesn't feel like it's that low. We just had two fairly major incidents within a week of each other. And yet, that's not what's been sticking with people, Raige interjected with a twinkle in his blue eyes. Everyone keeps coming back to Dick's defeat of All For One. That's the path forward for creating a lasting presence in the public consciousness. Hopefully this interview tonight will solidify that further. Actually, I was wondering if I could get a bit more insight into this interview. Dick said with anticipation. What will Mr. Tokuda be asking me about this time? Regrettably, Tenio won't be joining us tonight, but I was able to get someone even better. Kunsetsu smiled smugly. I scored you an interview with Deku Miyagi. Deku Miyagi. Rerica's eyes got wide. The most trusted name in news. One and the same. The publicist looked pleased with himself. What better way to garner the public's trust than to have him perform in the interview, live and uncut for everyone to see? I'll live. Dick stammered nervously. Ken, I don't know if that's such a good idea. Nonsense. You'll do fine, Ryder assured him. You'll just be going through that footage that the commission released and giving an explanation for some of the unclear parts. You've seen the footage, haven't you? I can pull it up if you want a refresher. Dick was silent for a moment. No, that won't be necessary. Chaka looked at her friend, only to see that the sadness and distance had returned to his eyes. Dick. Ooh, a major interview and a reaction video. This is shaping up to be a winner. Concepsu rolled his wheelchair toward the elevator. Well, we have a bit of time before the interview. Why don't we give Rarico the grand tour? As the two heroes followed the publicist, Rarico kept a concerned eye on Dick. He smiled confidently for Ryder, but she could tell from his lifeless eyes that something was still bothering him. Dick, what happened to you on that day? Chapter 15. The fluorescent lights buzzed in the cindered block room, bathing a small table and 3 chairs in a greenish-white glow. 2 of the chairs sat unoccupied on one side of the table, but it was the 3rd chair that held Kyoko's attention as she peered through the one-way window. This chair was bolted to the floor, with restraints on its front legs and arms. These were fastened around the ankles and wrists of a young woman, the woman responsible for the panic incident from a few days prior. She wore a standard prison jumpsuit as well as a unique-looking set of goggles. Kyoko plugged her jacks into the external wall and focused on the criminal in order to get a baseline of her vitals before the interrogation was to commence. So, this is the scumbag that made the mess the other night. Bakugo growled as he looked through the window. She can't be much older than we are. Yaozu sounded a bit taken aback as she made the observation. She calls herself Ernden, the overseeing officer explained. Based on the info we could find, her quirky operates on line of sight, so the blacked-out goggles will prevent her from using it on you while you're in there. Huh. I'd like to see her try. The explosive hero sneered. Dynamite, we shouldn't take her power lightly, Yaozu reprimanded him. You saw what she was able to do to the city in a matter of minutes, not to mention what happened to Dig. We should be grateful that these precautions are in place. Whatever. He rolled his eyes. Kyoko shot him a bemused glare as she continued gathering her information. I'm glad Momo was able to come. With Midoriya preoccupied with his interview, I was afraid I was going to have to deal with Bakugo myself. Although... She looked at her friend with a bit of concern. Kriti, are you sure you're going to be okay in there? You seem pretty shaken up after the incident. Yaozu looked down sadly. I've had some time to process the events of that afternoon, playing it over and over again in my mind. It all happened so fast. I don't think there's anything I could have done to prevent the outcome. She glared through the window at the cause of the chaos. Right now, I just need to know why it had to happen at all. We're hoping you'll be able to help answer that as well, the officer spoke up. We've been trying to get her to open up since she was brought in, but we haven't made any progress. When I'm through, she'll be singing like a canary. Bakugo punched a clenched fist into an open palm. Ears, what's the holdup? Just finished getting the baseline. She's pretty calm right now, so any irregularities should be easy to pick up. Kyoko smirked at him, as long as you don't blow up the room first. Great. Showtime, Ponytail. The 2 interrogators turned to enter the small room. As Kyoko watched through the window, the officer nervously shuffled over and stood next to her. Should I be concerned? He asked under his breath. No, it'll be fine, she chuckled. Dynamite just has an intense way of doing things. Hopefully Krita can keep him in check. She turned her attention back to the room as Yaozu took a seat across from the villain. Bakugo opted to lean against a nearby wall. Oh, good. I thought you guys had forgotten about me. I'd say it's nice to see you, but, you know. Erindon pointed with her restrained hands to the eyewear donning her face. These are really unnecessary. It's not like my quirk will help me out of this chair or anything. It's just a standard precaution. I'm sure you can understand that, Yaozu said calmly. Right, standard procedure. The young woman adjusted her position as much as the restraints would allow. That's just another way of saying you're afraid of what I can do to you. Well, can you blame us for being cautious? Oh no, I totally understand why you're doing it. I just find it a little ironic, the villain replied smugly. What's that supposed to mean? Bakugo snarled. Aren't you heroes all about inspiring people to face their fears? Don't be afraid, because I'm here. And yet here you are, hiding behind a pair of goggles, because you're afraid of what I'll be able to dig up. Pretty hypocritical if you ask me. Listen, filth. I'm not afraid of anything. Bakugo walked over and slammed his hand on the table. Especially not a loser like you. When you have a quirk like mine, you find out rapidly that everyone's afraid of something. She leaned back slightly in her chair. Whether it's a repressed phobia or some unresolved trauma, my quirk has never had trouble latching onto something. If you want to take the goggles off, I'd be happy to prove you wrong. No, I think you've done quite enough damage already. Yaozu held up a hand to keep Bakugo from taking her up on the offer. Your quirk sent over 100 people to the hospital and brought the city's infrastructure to a grinding halt. That's not counting the incidents, injuries, and deaths brought on by the resulting collateral damage. I know. The cops ran through the list during our first chat. Erindon sighed heavily. It was difficult for Kyoka to tell due to the goggles, but she almost looked remorseful. Look, if it makes a difference, I never intended for people to die. I just wanted to cause a little chaos. But why? Is it just for some twisted adrenaline rush? Kryota spoke earnestly as she tried to understand. What drove you to act so recklessly? That's the question of the day, huh? The villain tilted her head downward with a sad sort of smile on her face. I wasn't always like this, you know. There was a time when I wanted to be one of you guys. A hero. Don't make me laugh. Bakugo mocked. That's exactly what everyone said growing up. No one believed in me, but I could see it so clearly. Patrolling the streets, literally striking fear into the hearts of evildoers. The guilty heart of a criminal just seemed like the ideal situation for your quirk. Yaozu's tone was sincere. Why didn't you pursue it? Oh, I did, but apparently hero schools only care if your quirk can help you take out a bunch of robots. That obviously didn't work in my favor, so I ultimately didn't get in. Erindon sighed. You all got accepted into UA while I was left sitting on the curb with my shattered dreams. I guess, as far as the other night goes, I wanted to see what you had that I didn't. So you endangered innocent lives just so you could test us. Yaozu looked surprised at this revelation. I made my way in the world after failing that entrance exam. I did odd jobs, worked some security gigs during the hero shortage, may have taken matters into my own hands a few times, but always wondered why I wasn't good enough. I watched heroes crack and fall apart due to the fear that they kept hidden. Then we came out on the other side of the crisis, and there you all were, standing tall and proud. I needed to know. Erindon's dejected tone shifted to a surprisingly hopeful one. And then I ran into Big. What's he got to do with this? Bakugo snapped back. I just thought he was a persistent nuisance for most of the night, but then I watched as he jumped in front of your phone jack to shield her from my quirk. I don't know how he knew, but he intercepted it just in time. Even when I'm using full strength at point-blank range, I've never seen anyone react so viscerally to my quirk, the villain pondered aloud. Whatever I latched onto, it wasn't something repressed and buried deep down. It was right there at the front of his mind. He had to have known what would happen to him, and yet he sacrificed himself anyway. I can understand why I wasn't supposed to target him. Yaozu glanced at the Kugo and then back toward the mirror Kyoko was standing behind. Who told you not to target Dick? Kyoko could hear the villain's heart rate increase. Now we're getting somewhere. I don't know what you mean, Erendon said nervously. I was working on my own. You may have been acting alone, but that doesn't rule out the possibility that someone was directing you to do so. Yaozu tried to ease the young woman's nerves, but to no avail. If there's any part of you that still wants to do the right thing, you need to help us bring this person to justice. I think I've said enough for this session. Erendon began to panic. Guards. I'd like to go back to my cell now, please. You're not going anywhere, loser. But Kugo launched over the table and grabbed the villain's chair. The bolts holding the chair to the floor snapped as he rapidly dropped the restrained villain backwards until she was parallel with the floor. You're going to tell me who you're working for, and you're going to tell me now. Suddenly, Bakugo dropped the chair and stumbled backwards. Gasping for air, he leaned on the wall for support. Kyoko looked to see what had happened, only to find that, in the commotion, Erendon's goggles had slipped, exposing one of her eyes. The villain took several deep breaths and regained her composure as Bakugo struggled to maintain his. Like I said, everyone's afraid of something, Erendon snickered as the guards rushed in to secure and isolate her. The setting sun painted the top of the skyline in shades of orange and purple as the snow-covered mountain glowed radiantly beyond the city limits. After Mr. Raiga and Dick had shown Rarika around the building, her friend was whisked away to get ready for the upcoming interview. While she waited, she wandered onto that balcony just outside the studio and became mesmerized by the breathtaking scenery, so much so that she failed to hear footsteps approaching from behind her. It's a nice view, isn't it? Achako whirled around to see where the voice had come from, and what she found made her heart skip a beat. The young man standing before her wore a sharp suit and tie and a familiar grin. Days of hard work and fatigue were hit by the expert work of the makeup crew, and his normally unruly green hair had been brought into submission. Look who's talking. She smiled at her friend. They really did a number on you, Dick. Yeah, Ken thought I should be a little more formal for this interview, but I think it might be a bit much. He tugged uncomfortably at the collar of his white dress shirt. This outfit is a little stiff, and it's going to take forever to wash all the gel out of my hair. No, it's not too much. I think you look great. She felt her cheeks warm up as she realized what she had just said. For your interview, I mean. Right, of course, he replied with a nervous smile. Achako thought he might be blushing as well, but the makeup prevented her from being certain. The two laughed for a second before both turning their attention to the landscape beyond the balcony. This view is amazing, Rarika sighed contentedly as a cold breeze brushed through her hair. I'd almost consider relocating the agency if it meant seeing this every day. If I'm being honest, the thought had crossed my mind, Dick replied. This place does have a lot of amenities, the location is nice, and I wouldn't have to make this trip every time Ken needs to meet with me. Really? Achako was a little surprised. Why haven't you mentioned it before? Because I can't help but think about what I have of the agency right now. Dick gazed at the horizon, the light from the sunset twinkling in his eyes. The hard work all of you guys put into the building, your dad's generosity, it would be a shame to just throw that all away. I can understand that, and it would be sad, but it is just a building. I don't think anyone would blame you. It's like you said. Kyoto is a much more central location for both hero work and your responsibilities here. Yeah, but there are some things that Kyoto could never replace. Musutov was where I grew up. It's where I found my passion for being a hero and where I finally got my quirk. It's where I trained with All Might and at UA High. It's where I met some of my greatest mentors. And my closest friends. He turned and smiled at Rarika, who discreetly touched her fingers together to confirm that it wasn't her quirk making her feel weightless. Yes, Kyoto might be a more convenient place, but Musutov was home. Dick, 2-minute warning, Mr. Midoriya. An aide beckoned him back inside for the interview. Dick nodded in acknowledgement before turning back to Rarika, the last rays of sunlight illuminating their faces. She wished they could have talked longer, and the look in his eyes told her he felt the same way. Guess it's time, huh? He let out a shaky sigh as he turned to head into the studio. Hey. Ichako reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. You've got this, Dick. He smiled in appreciation as the two walked out of the cold twilight. The interview started off perfectly. Dick was every bit as confident as Ichako knew he could be. His calm, friendly tone and the warm smile he wore would have been enough to put even the biggest skeptic at ease. Yet now, after seeing the security footage for the first time, the light in Dick's eyes had begun to fade. His bright, reassuring expression was replaced with one of sullen remembrance. I know that must have been difficult for you to watch after all this time, Deku Miyagi said to the young hero. It brought back a lot of painful memories, Dick said quietly. If you'd like, we can pause and begin with the questions after a commercial break, the one home news anchor kindly offered. No, the people need answers now. Dick sniffed as he put on a brave face. I'll be fine. But you're not, Dick. As the questions began, Rarika barely heard a word he said as she intently focused on the struggle her friend was going through. The burden of confronting these memories while also being sure to keep his quirk's true nature a secret was evident on his face, but it went deeper than that. This is about more than what's in the footage, isn't it? My, this is hitting him harder than I expected, Ken whispered to Rarika from behind the camera crews. I knew there would be some emotions, but this is troubling. It might have something to do with the panic incident we were coming off of, she replied under her breath. He got hit pretty hard by the nightmare quirk. I'm sorry, what? Ken's eyes were wide with surprise. He was out of commission for 2 days. Did the media not cover that? All of the reports said it was a non-lethal gunshot wound or something to that effect. Raige struggled not to raise his voice. You mean to tell me he was in a panic-induced coma for 48 hours, and we almost immediately placed him in a high-stress situation live on national television? What was he thinking? Mr. Miyagi's voice cut through the behind-the-scenes conversation. Dick, it's clear you went through a lot to save us from a horrible fate. We've seen compelling evidence tonight, and your account backs it up. I don't want to put you through this more than necessary, but I have one last question for the record. Can you say, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that All For One and Shigaraki have been permanently dealt with? Yes. Dick said quietly. Then, with all the determination he had in him, he looked directly at the camera to address the people. Your nightmare is over. Your lives can return to normal. And if another threat of this magnitude rises again, take heart. I'm here. And we're clear. The director announced as the live interview came to an end. Dick immediately stood from his chair and rushed into the dressing room, closing the door behind him. I hate to run, but I have some things to take care of, Kunsetsu said to Rarika. I need to make sure this doesn't become a problem for the brand. As the advertiser quickly wheeled out of the studio, Rarica walked over to the dressing room. She could hear Dick gasping for air on the other side of the door. "Dick, are you okay?" she asked with concern. The click of the door's lock engaging told her everything she needed to know. Every fiber of her being wanted to be in there helping him, but she resigned herself to respecting his privacy. For the next 10 minutes, she kept others from trying to enter the room, doing what little she could to help him through this. After things had settled down a bit, she heard the doorknob jostle and the door creak open. Dick emerged from the room wearing his hero uniform, his gelled hair pointing in all directions. As he passed, Ichako peered into the room to find the suit he had been wearing ripped to pieces. "Dick, wow." She stopped short as she turned to see him walking out onto that balcony. "Dick." She followed him into the cold night and found him leaning on the railing, looking down on the lights of the city. His heavy breaths were visible in the cold night air, and his face glistened with panicked sweat and tears. "Is it the nightmare?" she asked as she walked over to him. He slowly nodded. "And the memories? Do you want to talk about it?" Dick remained silent for a long while. "No. Not now," he finally managed. Before Chako could say anything, her earpiece activated. "Gravity, how'd the interview go? Is Dick available?" Kyoko nervously asked over the intercom. "We just wrapped up," Rarica answered quietly as she walked away, trying to give Dick some space. "He's taking the whole thing pretty hard though, so now might not be the best time." "Well, when he's doing better, can you guys head back here?" Kyoko sounded stressed. "Dynamite had a bit of an incident with our culprit." "Oh no. Did he get hit by her quirk? Is he okay?" Rarica braced herself against a sudden gust of wind. It was touch and go for a bit, but he's on the mend. She must not have used her full power. "Stop making me sound weak, ears." But Kuga shouted angrily in the background. "Anyway, we think Dick might be able to get this girl to talk more than we're able to," Kyoko continued. She seemed impressed by him. "All right, I'll let him know, and we'll head out as soon as." Ichako's voice trailed off as she turned around. Dick was nowhere to be seen. As she frantically looked for him, she heard a loud noise coming from above. She whipped her head upward in time to see a streak of green shooting across the night sky, heading straight for Muzikifwa. "Oh no." Ichako tapped her boots, activated her quirk, and rocketed after Dig. All the while, Melissa's words rang through her head. "The last thing we need is for you to relapse in my day and fall to your death. As long as you're not alone." She pushed the turbines to their maximum output, racing to catch up to him before the concern became a reality. Chapter 16. The cold wind whipped past Dick as he released another Delaware smash to propel himself toward Muzikifwa. A developing winter storm shot shards of ice at his face, but he remained undeterred. "I should have been there. I should have been ready to help. If I had been, Kekken wouldn't be." A fiery memory flashed through his mind's eye, as vivid and realistic as it was the day it was etched there. No. That was the past. Dick closed his eyes and shook his head to clear his thoughts, but this only allowed a new vision to take hold. His eyelids refused to open as he felt his body seize up. Dozens of disembodied hands appeared from the darkness and rushed toward him, grabbing onto him and tightening around his body. As he struggled against the constricting hallucination, he felt himself plummeting into the abyssal darkness that surrounded him. The harder he struggled to break free, the tighter the hands held onto him. He was unable to move, struggling to breathe, and acutely aware that, while he was trapped in this mental prison, he had mere seconds before his body slammed into the icy ground he had been flying over. Suddenly, a feeling of warmth appeared on the small of his back. He felt his free fall begin to slow. The warmth began to spread, causing the nightmarish claws clinging to him to loosen and melt away. The comforting feeling wrapped around him and embraced him, and Dick began to hear a faint noise echoing through that void. It was barely audible at first, but it continued to grow until he could make out a quiet voice. "You're safe now, Dick. I'm here." Dick's head shot off the pillow it had been resting on. He found himself once again in a strange room. The soft glow of the snow outside filtered through the curtains and the windows, allowing him to faintly see his surroundings. White walls adorned with pink flowers surrounded him, and a basket of stuffed animals sat in the corner of what was apparently a little girl's room. He swung his bare feet off the small bed he had apparently slept in, but sat still when he heard a small clattering sound coming from beyond the room's closed door. He slowly moved toward it to investigate, preparing himself for anything. As he peeked through the door, he could see a fireplace, crackling brightly as it warmed the rustic living space. Two empty chairs and a coffee table sat in front of the fire, but the rest of the room was otherwise unfurnished. Dick carefully walked through the door to investigate. The fire cast shadows around the dusty room, jumping and flickering as it illuminated the bare walls. He could see his red boots sitting neatly by what he assumed was the front door of the house. The pleasant aroma of burning wood was accompanied by the odor of tobacco and ash. Another smell joined these as a door creaked open. "Ah, I thought I heard someone mowing around in here." Dick whipped around to see an older gentleman enter the room. His tall, lanky frame nearly had to duck through the doorway to avoid hitting his exposed head. The remnants of his orange locks retreating to the side of his scalp and diving off toward his shoulders. His wizened face was serious yet kind, the shadows cast around his sunken eyes offset by their blue color and the gleam from the fire. He carried two steaming mugs in his hands, one of which he raised toward Midoriya. "Coffee. Ah." The young hero was utterly confused. "Where am I, and who is this guy?" He glanced toward his boots and the door. "You just rolled you to bed, kid. Give yourself a chance to wake up before taking off again." The floorboards creaked under the man's bare feet as he moved slowly over to the coffee table, his loose shirt and tattered jeans flowing in contrast to his rigid posture. He placed a mug on one side of the table and then sat down in one of the chairs, sipping the brew from his own mug. Dick took the other seat and picked up his mug for a drink. The strength and bitterness of the dark liquid almost made him choke. "Before you ask," the elder wheezed with a smirk on his face, "I don't have any cream or sugar. No. It's fine." "Thank you," Izuku coughed as he regained his composure. "Ah, sir. Can I ask?" "You've been out for a few hours," the man abruptly began answering the unasked question. "You've passed out mid-flight in the middle of a snow squall. Probably be dead if it weren't for your girlfriend Rarika. She's not. I mean, we're not. We're just friends." Dick could feel his face burning. The old man's eyes twinkled mischievously as he took another swig of his coffee. "Wait." The heat from Midoriya's face drained as clammy worry took its place. "Rarika. Where is she? Is she okay?" "Oh, your friend is fine." He coughed and cleared his throat. "She waited by the fire until the storm passed, and then went for a walk. Said she needed to clear her head." Izuku breathed a sigh of relief as he leaned back in the chair. He lifted the mug to his lips again, better prepared for the potent brew this time around. As he slowly sipped the beverage, he stared into the fire. His mind was in a fog of confusion as he thought about everything and nothing at the same time. "So, you got any other friends besides this Rarika girl?" the man asked before coughing again, his throat likely that victim of the tobacco Dick had smelled earlier. Yes, sir, I have quite a few. Izuku smiled fondly as his thoughts began to sort themselves out. We were actually on our way back to help them before. Well, I see, the man said thoughtfully. So, like a true hero, you darted off to help them with no thought for yourself, right? They must mean a lot to you. They do. I'd do anything to help them. Well, if they're half the friends to you that Miss Rarica is, I'm sure they'd all do the same for you. You have a good thing going here. You have friends that care about each other, that legitimately want everyone to reach their best potential. Mr. Rarica's words from his first day back flowed through his mind as the storm within him continued to settle. It must hurt him to see you struggling the way you're. The old recluse took another sip of his coffee. What do you mean, sir? Izuku asked nervously. The old man looked at him, a gleam from the fire danced in his eyes. Kid, I've been around a few times. I know the face of someone that's in over their head, looking for help. Heck, I've seen it staring back at me in the mirror a time or two. There are some fights you can't win on your own. Sometimes you need help. Izuku's words to Kekken from weeks earlier rang hollow through his mind as he realized his own hypocrisy. Good friends will pick up on the two, and they'll be knocking on your door, ready to help. He cleared his throat before taking another swig of coffee. If you keep closing the door on them, though, they'll eventually stop knocking. They all trust you to help them with their struggles. You need to trust them to help you with yours. Melissa's words cut through the clouds in his mind, and Dick quietly stared into the flames. Yes, good friends will take you at your word and respect your wishes. The old man turned to Midoriya, a smirk on his face and a twinkle in his eyes. But the best friends won't give up on you. They won't take no for an answer. The flurry of conflict in Izuku's mind vanished. Hands shaking, he put the mug down on the coffee table. I'm sorry, sir, but I need to go. Do you? 3 miles north of here, there's a little pavilion on the top of a hill. Thought the fire pit up there would keep her warm. The old man winked at him knowingly. Dick stood and bowed to his host. Thank you for your hospitality, mister. You can call me Iichiro, he said. And it was my pleasure. It's not the first time someone's been lost in these woods. Well, I appreciate it all the same. Midoriya rushed to the door and knelt to get his boots on. As he was lacing up, he noticed something on the wall. It was faint, but he could just make out the pencil markings of a makeshift height chart. Based on where the markings ended, they appeared to be for a small child. Then he remembered the room that he woke up in. Must be his granddaughter. As he finished putting on his boots, he was able to make out a name next to the chart. Mr. Iichiro, he said as he stood up, please thank Kita for letting me borrow her room the next time you see her. It was a big help to me. The old man's eyes glistened as he looked at the young hero, a faint smile on his face. I'm sure she would have been happy to help. He coughed and cleared his throat. Now you'd better get going. Dick bowed once more as he exited the small house, ran off the front porch, and took off to the north. He knew he needed to get back to Musuta to help his friends. Before that, however, he realized that he was the one that needed help. The soft glow of the approaching sun appeared on the horizon, the blackness giving way to dark shades of purple. Ichako sat in front of a small fire pit at the gazebo atop the hill. It was a solitary place, perfect for processing the swirling thoughts and emotions that assaulted her mind. The events of the last few days had taken their toll on her. The worry from Dick's coma and the relief at his recovery, the enjoyable trip to Kyoto and the moments of conversation before the interview, the pain of watching him struggle through the footage from the battle, the panicked effort to save him from his relapse, all leading back to yet another coma. I was there for him. I was ready, but nothing changed. I don't know what else I can do. Maybe I'm not good enough to help him. She turned her back to a sudden gust of wind from the south, and as it settled, she got the sense that she was no longer alone. "Is this seat taken?" Rerica turned to see Dick standing beside the bench she occupied. The glow of the fire illuminated the sheepish grin on his face. "Dick, you're awake." She jumped up and threw her arms around him. "I was so worried. Are you okay?" "I'm doing better now thanks to you," he said as he returned the embrace. "Our host told me everything you did for me last night." "Thank you." Achako jumped back at a sudden realization. "You had no idea what was going on when you woke up, and I wasn't there for you." She plopped back down on the bench and ran her fingers through her hair in frustration. "I've got to be the worst friend ever." "What are you talking about?" Dick sat down next to her. "If there's one thing you've always been, it's a good friend, maybe the best I've ever had. You've always had my back, even when I haven't asked for it or deserved it. If anything, I should be apologizing to you for shutting you out. Dick, you've been through so much. I totally understand that there are some things that are difficult to talk about. It's just..." She turned to look at her friend. "Since you've been back, amid the excitement of the agency and our futures, I've seen flashes of something. That can-do attitude just vanishes, replaced with a shroud of darkness and doubt. It's not like you, and I want to help you through it, but I don't know how." Her voice trailed off as her gaze returned to the flickering embers of the fading fire. The light on the horizon slowly grew brighter as the deep purples began to give way to brighter shades of pink and orange. The two sat for a few minutes before Dick broke the silence with a heavy breath. "What do you remember about our last 2 years of school?" he asked. "A lot of it is a blur," Rerica sighed. "The Hero Public Safety Commission turned the schools into safe houses for civilians displaced by the uptick in villain activity after the prison breaks. Since all of our teachers were needed in the field to respond to the chaos, we were divided into groups and assigned to a pro to help. Groups would take turns resting at school and getting caught up on the traditional coursework, but most of our time was devoted to field experience. Everyone was assigned a specific area to patrol." She looked at Dick as a twinge of sadness crossed her mind. "Everyone except you. I wish I could have been with you guys," he said with regret, "but I couldn't stay in one place for very long. With the use of Ragdoll's stolen quirk, All for One could track me down wherever I was. I needed time to prepare my body to effectively use the full power of One for All, and I couldn't put anyone else in danger while I was doing that. Our paths crossed a few times during those years, and every time I saw you, your progress was evident, but you always looked so lonely. I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss my friends, but I wasn't completely alone. I had All Might and the previous users of One for All to keep me company as I trained, so you spent 2 years talking to yourself." Achako tried to lighten the mood a little bit, which thankfully brought a small grin to her friend's face. "I guess you could say that," he chuckled, "but it was necessary. I needed to master all their quirks if I wanted to stand a chance against All for One. On top of that, the training on how to operate effectively in the Vestige realm was essential if I wanted to save Tenko. Rerica suddenly recalled something. "During your coma the other day, you mumbled that name multiple times, but you've never mentioned him before. Who?" Tenko Shimuro was the grandson of All Might's predecessor, Nana Shimuro. The unexpected awakening of his quirk tragically resulted in the death of his family. He was eventually taken in by All for One, who molded him into the person we knew as Tomura Shigaraki. Wait, hold up. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You wanted to save Shigaraki." "That's what Kepkin said too, but it's more complicated than that," Dick replied solemnly. "During the Battle of Jiek, Shigaraki tried to steal one for all from me, an action which inadvertently brought me to his vestige realm. There, I could see the vestige of All For One trying to assert dominance over his pupil and feel the hatred coming from within Shigaraki. However, underneath all that raw anger, I could sense sadness, regret, loneliness, and pain. In a moment of clarity, I could see the boy that All For One had corrupted, the boy that Shigaraki had tried to bury, a boy that needed to be saved. Dick stared into the distance, remorse filling his eyes. And, in the end, I couldn't save him. Chako had never seen Dick look so sad and vulnerable. She put a hand on his shoulder and looked him in the eye. Dick, you don't have to carry this burden alone. I'm here. Please, let me help you. As the sun began to break over the horizon, Dick took a deep breath and began to tell his account of the fateful day. The distress call went out over the intercom, and my heart sank. All of the heroes, myself included, had been dispatched to deal with a sudden attack by the League of Villains in Gigantomachia. Thinking we were heading into the final confrontation, a skeleton crew was left behind to man the automated defense systems at the schools. We thought we were about to end the nightmare, but we only played into All For One's hand. Using a combination of his quirk and the quirk he had stolen from Overhaul, All For One had converted many of the villains that had escaped prison into a new and terrifying breed of High-Nem. He had warped this new army into EA, turning the civilian safe haven into a prison from the inside out. It was obvious that this was a trap, a move designed to lure me out of hiding after almost 2 years, but we didn't have a choice. With the bulk of the diversion taken care of and only a family affair remaining, the majority of us rushed back to UA to reclaim it. We made our approach through the woods outside the school. I prepared myself for a difficult fight against the first wave of them, but just as they came into view, I was stopped in my tracks. A rank-smelling black goo came pouring out of my mouth and began to cover me. I felt a hand grab my back as the substance completely enveloped me. When it cleared, I was no longer on the outskirts of the school facing down a battalion of Hyans. I was on the edge of the arena where the sports festival had been held nearly 3 years prior. The full moon overhead illuminated the night's darkness, revealing my opponents on the opposite side of the battlefield. All For One in both his original body and Shigaraki's possessed body. So good of you to join us. Izuku Midori, the dilapidated face of the original villain, smiled at me. I've been looking forward to this. And I see you brought a friend with you. I felt the hand that had grabbed my back loosen and turned to see Kekken standing behind me. Did you think I was going to let you have all the fun, Dick? Kekken, I said, half relieved that he was there and half concerned for the same reason. I thought this would be a fitting location for this fight. All For One's words came out of Shigaraki's mouth. The place where I first learned your name, the place where you got your first taste of being a part of this ridiculous society. This will be the place where you lose it also. What? You brought me here for a 2-on-1 fight. I tried to sound confident despite the overwhelming opposition. Oh no, I'm a good sport. We were going to warp in an ally for you, but you brought your own. All For One laughed. I guess we'll have to settle for a fight against 1.5 opponents. I'll make you eat those words. You old geezer. Kekken exploded forward and began relentlessly attacking All For One's original body. Explosions rocked the stadium, sparking fires around the arena. The battle was bathed in the light of red flames and the moon's pale glow from above. While Kekken battled the master, I engaged head-on with the pupil, dodging his attacks and calling out to the part of him that was resisting All For One's control. Tomura Shigaraki may have done terrible things, but Tenko Shinra was still a part of him, and that sliver of his past needed to be saved before true justice could be served. In some respects, All For One's presence in his new host was similar to All Might's presence in One For All, an actual piece of the villain's consciousness. However, while All Might was only able to interact with this vestige through feelings, All for One had full agency over the virus that existed within Shigaraki. This fact forced the villain to split his focus between the two fights, which gave us an advantage in our efforts. That all changed when I was finally able to get through to Shigaraki, briefly breaking All for One's hold over him. In a fit of blind fury, he lunged at his master, knocking Kekken out of the way. Turning All for One's own power against him, his successor stole a duplicate copy of the quirk, doubling his own power in the process. I watched as the original villain decayed into nothingness, then stared in horror as Shigaraki's face twisted into a wicked grin that I wish was something that only existed in my nightmares. With his former body gone, All for One was now able to devote his full focus to controlling his new body and completing his main objective, acquiring the power of One for All. The newly reborn evil turned his attention toward me and began launching a barrage of various offensive quirks in my direction. I did my best to dodge and counter the assault, but I was not prepared for the compounded force of a doubled All for One. Even with danger sense, I detected the final blast too late. It launched me through a wall, knocking the wind out of me. "Don't worry, I won't kill you," the villain's menacing voice called out to me. "I want to watch your face as the last glimmer of hope fades from your eyes." I looked just in time to see the villain flying through the air towards me, his right arm reshaped into the form of a large sword. Unable to react fast enough, I could only close my eyes and brace for the piercing pain of the blade. I opened my eyes to see Kekken flying between All for One and me. With both of his hands, Kekken unleashed a powerful howitzer impact, the most intense one I have ever seen him use. The force of the blast sent the villain flying back across the battlefield as Kekken fell to the ground. It was only then that I fully understood what had just happened. Kekken had intercepted the piercing blow, simultaneously shielding me and holding All for One in place for his attack. I reflexively grabbed his injured body and moved him to the outskirts of the arena. "Kekken!" I cried as I watched his rapidly weakening face. With what little strength he had left, he grabbed my collar and looked me dead in the eyes. "This is the second time." "You damn nerd," he wheezed into my ear. "Make it." The last. With those words, Kekken succumbed to unconsciousness. I quickly radioed for medical attention to his position, hoping beyond all hope that the battle against them was going better than mine. Fury coursed through me as I launched myself back towards the villain, but it wasn't the blinding rage that got the better of me yet. It was not the time for a violent outburst. With All for One in complete control, it would be impossible to save Tenko Shimmer from the outside. Fortunately, All Might, the vestiges, and I had been training for this possibility. The villain wasted no time in closing the gap between us, and in seconds, he had used a number of his stolen quirks to put me on my knees, pinned to the ground. All I could do was look up at that menacing smile. "I've waited so long for this moment," he cackled as he reached his hand toward my face. "Thank you, little brother, for amassing this power for me. Your efforts are greatly appreciated." Dick. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see that everyone had arrived faster than I expected. While Yaozu and some of the more medically minded heroes tended to Kekken, Lyrica, Ida, and the others rushed to help me, looks of panic and determination on their faces. No. I held up my hand to tell them to stay back before unleashing a massive smoke screen to keep them away. That was my last act before my consciousness slipped out of the physical world. Everything was going according to plan. Chapter 17. As I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in a shadowy void of darkness. It was similar to the one within One for All where the vestiges conversed with me, but this realm was much more chaotic. Fragmented pieces of cities floated aimlessly in the abyss while nightmarish hands reached and grasped through the wreckage. As I took stock of this, I began to hear voices calling out. Flashes of memories that were not my own appeared as the writhing hills get morphed before me. I could see and feel everything that had led to this point. Like the vestiges that dwelt in my own mind, my consciousness was beginning to sync with the memories and emotions that drove Shigaraki. The process of stealing one for all had actually begun this time. It was a battle of wills now. I could feel the heart of the struggle beneath me as I looked over the ledge that I stood on. Below, I could see Shigaraki on his knees, struggling to resist his master's control. During the Battle of Yek, I had caught a glimpse of this struggle. At the time, All For One appeared as a monstrous parasite attached to Shigaraki's body. Now, however, the villain was fully formed and independent, free from the scars of centuries of conflict. The only tether between the two was his firm grasp on his pupil's white hair, which he used to repeatedly slam Shigaraki's head into the ground in an effort to bring him into submission. If that resolve breaks and regains access to the power of One For All, it's all over. Suddenly, I watched as the second through sixth users darted towards the conflict below, seeking to divide All For One's attention once more and provide some sort of opening. I felt a surge of energy as I turned to see the first user, All For One's brother, standing before a massive door. Blinding light seeped through the cracks around the door as he exerted all his strength on holding the door shut, preventing the power of One For All from merging with All For One. As I looked around, still preparing my consciousness to act in the realm, I saw the wispy vestige of All Might and his mentor, Nana Shinra, standing in the shattered remains of a residential backyard. With enough focus, I was able to manifest myself next to them, just as they began interacting with another group of vestiges. An elderly couple, a small girl, and a young woman. So, "You're Kotaro's family," Nana said sadly as she looked at the group. The adults looked concerned and unsure of the visitors, but the girl stared with wonder in her eyes. "Grandma, is it really you?" She ran towards Nana as tears rolled down her cheeks. "You're a hero. You can help Tenko." Before the girl could reach her grandmother, another figure, a man, darted in from the side, scooping her up and taking her back to the others. "She can't help him, Hannah," he said with disdain. "She only knows how to abandon family." Kotaro. The vestige of the seventh user had a pained look on her face, her eyes glistening with sadness. "I left because I loved you. I didn't want the villain I was after to hurt you. How'd that work out for you, mother?" Kotaro shouted angrily. "You failed. The madman is just as much a threat now as he was when you abandoned me. You wanted me to live a life full of smiles and joy, but on that night, I saw my joy in bloody scraps on the ground, and the last smile I saw was Tenko's as he left me in the same state." He moved forward and got right in Nana's face. "All of this started with your heroic nonsense. This is all your fault." The sound of a hand smacking across the man's face echoed into the void. He turned to see the young woman standing behind him. Due to the nature of the realm, I could feel the anger and regret inside her. "You know that's not true. We've all been trapped here since that villain added our quirks to his and then transferred them to our son. We've already lived those horrible memories through Tenko's eyes over and over again. You went too far. When he needed kind words and guidance, you slapped him and threw him out in the yard. When his quirk manifested and he was scared and confused, we tried to help him. You beat him. Don't tell me you haven't felt the pain you caused him." "I have, and it breaks my heart." "And why?" "Because you were too bitter to see what your mother was trying to do for you. He was only 5. What choice did I have?" Kotaro yelled back, a similar feeling of regret building inside of him. Even after your death, Mother, you were still haunting me with your self-destructive heroism. In spite of my best efforts, those ideals managed to infect my son, who was not going to be able to follow those dreams. The doctor said the X-rays were almost a guaranteed sign of him never manifesting a quirk. Those dreams needed to die before Tenko did, just like what the doctor said to my mom, and All Might's ghostly vestige turned to me, and I felt the realization sweep across us. Shigaraki's fragmented memories began pouring in. Pieces fell into place as the bigger picture came into view. The recollection of Tenko's appointment, the doctor's bald head, mustache, and goggles. The remembrance of that day Tenko's allergies started, the stranger that returned him to his home, and a smile on his shrouded face as he turned to leave. That smile. I could feel that my mouth finally had the freedom to move. He's been playing us all from the beginning. You stay out of this, kid. Kotaro glared at me with the same eyes that I had seen in Shigaraki's memories. I don't need the third generation of my mother's lunacy sticking his nose into my family's business. Your family's business doesn't matter anymore, Mr. Shinra, I responded calmly but firmly. Nothing you say here will change the past or what's happened since all your deaths. What matters now is your son. I looked over the ledge at the battle happening below. The other users of One for All were slowing down All for One's progress, but they weren't stopping it. Shigaraki's family joined me in observing the conflict. The monster is not my son, Kotaro spat as he watched the scene unfold. I'm connected to this world as much as you are right now, I said. I know you can feel him too. Not the malevolent force he's become, but the small child you once knew. He's still in there, and as much as Tomura will deny it, Tenko still blames himself for your deaths. His heart is longing for something that no one can provide but you. I've felt this longing personally. I couldn't help but draw the parallels between this tormented soul and my own experience after my diagnosis. He needs your support, not bitter denial or counter-objection. I think you know what he needs you to say. I wish I could, kid, Kotaro said with sad resignation, but after everything he's done, he can't be a hero. Maybe not the type of hero we're used to, but right now. I stared at the struggling young man, still resisting against all odds. Right now, he's the only one standing between the world and oblivion. With that, Nana and I rushed to join the fray while All Might went to help the first user hold back the convergence. As we landed, All for One let out an enthusiastic laugh. All done with your family reunion, Nana. I was hoping for a little reunion myself. Where's my little brother and All Might? Not still resisting up there, I hope. We won't allow you to absorb One for All, you monster. Nano's voice was firmer and more determined than ever. I could feel the righteous fury inside her that had been growing since the talk with her son. It doesn't matter what you won't allow, All for One said, clearly amused by the heroics. Once Tomura inevitably relinquishes his will to me, nothing will stop me from doing as I see fit. Don't jump to conclusions, Master, Shigaraki grunted as he spat gravel out of his mouth. I haven't given up yet. This is my power. My dream. I'm not going to be a passenger along for the ride. Oh, my dear boy, that's all you ever were. All for One dropped all pretense of caring for his pupil's well-being at this point. You were never in control of anything. I manipulated all the circumstances that led you to this point. Your upbringing, your grandmother's abandonment, your hatred, even your quirk, all of it was from me. Years of careful planning, all with the singular purpose of creating a vessel with the raw emotion and willpower to overcome the laws of One for All and return it to its rightful owner, me. As All for One continued his rant, the other users and I unleashed wave after wave of energy on the villain and his victim, trying to turn the tide of the battle. I could feel the anguish in Shigaraki as he remembered all of the horrible things he had done in the name of this monstrous manipulator. Although these recollections made his hatred burn hotter, the realization of his foolishness led to a growing sense of shame. Despite our best efforts to empower the sliver of Tenko that existed within him, Tomura's will to resist was slipping. "That's right, Tomura, you're a failure." All for One raised Shigaraki's head off the ground and whispered in his ear. "You've done too many terrible things to ever be forgiven by the world. Even in your attempts to usurp me, you gave me the key to ultimate control. You're as worthless as the lives you've destroyed. Accept it, and let go." I watched as All for One prepared to deliver the finishing blow when, suddenly, something stopped him. "No one talks to my brother like that." Tenko's sister had grabbed All for One's wrist and was somehow preventing him from following through with his attack. "Huh?" The villain turned to look at the girl. "Oh, how adorable. Sorry dear, but this isn't one of your frivolous cartoons. Tomura hates you all with a passion. There's no love here for you to reach out to. His name is Tenko, and we still love him plenty." The small girl suddenly bit All for One's hand, causing him to lose his grip on Shigaraki's head. The battered young man wrenched his head around to see his mother and grandparents latching onto his assailant, holding him back from attacking. I could sense a flood of emotions wash over him as he saw his father, facing All for One and pushing him back from his son. "Dad. Mom. Hannah. What are you doing?" Shigaraki cried out in conflicted agony. "Listen, Tenko," Kotaro began talking as he struggled against the villain. "I know it's too late to atone for the things I did to you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, nor do I expect it. I let my own hurt and resentment bleed over into my parenting, and that was wrong. You may have committed many heinous deeds, but as guilty as you are, I'm more guilty for pushing you in that direction. Dad. However, none of that matters anymore. What matters now is stopping this maniac from inflicting your suffering on anyone else in the future. Growing up, you always knew what you wanted to be. Remember that. Don't forget it. Whatever you've done in the past, whoever sent you down that path, right now, in this moment, you can be a hero." With those 5 words, a massive shift in the balance of power occurred. The writhing black abyss was ablaze with blinding white light. The fragmented pieces of the world coalesced and became whole again. The hands that guided the landscape sprang to life. I watched in shock as thousands of them, all morphing to take on human form, lunged at All for One. The vestiges of the quarks within All for One. They must be feeding off of Tomura, no, Tenko's determination. Sure enough, Tomura's Shigaraki was nowhere to be seen on the battlefield. Instead, a small boy with dark, shaggy hair stood defiantly before the detained villain. I could feel the pressure of One for All's imminent convergence lessen as the boy turned his attention to conquering his demons. "You think you can defy me?" All for One grunted as he struggled against the multitude of vestiges, each one calling for his destruction. "I'm still a part of you, boy. You can't escape me. I'll always be with you. You'll lose your resolve one day, and when you do, I'll reassert my control." "That's just it, Master," the boy responded calmly. "I don't intend to give you that opportunity." "What are you talking about? You said it yourself. You're a part of me. You no longer have any power outside of me. I have no family, no friends, and there's no chance that society will forgive me for what I've done. If I can't atone for my actions, at least I can make sure that nothing like this ever happens again." The boy slowly walked toward his former master and reached out 5 fingers towards his face. The black shadow that covered All for One's face lifted, and for the first time, I could see his eyes. They were filled with fear and dread as Tenko's fingers made contact with his face. The decay spread rapidly, almost instantly disintegrating the villain. Tenko turned to the vestiges of his family and the other victims of All For One's reign of terror. "You can rest in peace now," he said as the effects of his quirk spread to them as well. I watched the faces of his family fill with pride as they faded from existence. Tenko stood motionless as the ground and structures around him began to decay as his quirk continued to spread. While the other vestiges of One For All evacuated, Nana, Shimura and I stayed behind watching the tranquil destruction. In the final moments of our connection to the realm, I could feel the surge of emotions coursing through Tenko as his life flashed before his eyes. I felt the pain of his upbringing and the profound regret of his actions against his family and the rest of the world. I felt the burning hatred against All For One and the monster that he became, as well as a deep sadness that, even in his final moments, all he could do was destroy. Then, as the wave of disintegration slowly encroached on him, acceptance washed over the boy as he realized that, for once, his destruction was for a purpose bigger than himself. I watched as Tenko turned to face his grandmother and tears filled his eyes as he smiled at us. Every fiber of my being wanted to do more for him, but in that moment, I realized that there was nothing else I could do. This was his choice. The first choice he had made without any external influence in a long time. He was finally, truly, free. The spreading decay finally made its way to its originator, and with a final burst of energy, the boy pushed us out of the deconstructing mindscape. I opened my eyes to the real world, and as the smokescreen I had unleashed earlier cleared, I watched in sadness as All For One's final victim disintegrated into dust, a peaceful smile on his face. Then everything faded to black. When I woke up, I was on an island, with my mom, Melissa, and All Might watching over me, Dick said weakly as he finished his tale. My physical recovery went fairly smoothly, but my mind is a different story. It would be one thing if I only had to deal with my own memories, but I also remember the scenes, memories and emotions from the vestige realm. When I close my eyes, I can still see everything that Tenko endured that led to him becoming Shigaraki. On top of that, I have to live with the fact that, despite my best efforts, I couldn't save him. He stared ahead as the newly risen sun glistened off the streams on his cheeks. "But you did save him." Dikachako put her arm around her friend and pulled him in close, guiding his head to her shoulder. "It might not have been the way you wanted it to end, but saving someone isn't about what we want. It's about doing what's best for them. You managed to reach him by reuniting his broken family, which freed him from All For One's control. You gave him the chance to be a hero in the only way possible, and you stayed with him in his final moments. If that's not saving him, then none of us have ever saved anybody." She ran her fingers through his shaggy green hair as she spoke, trying to comfort him as best she could. Dick sniffed as he nodded in acknowledgement. "I think the hardest part of having his memories is seeing how similar our childhoods were. We both found out we had no quirk at a young age, we both had family that didn't say what we needed to hear in our time of need, and we both received our quirks from someone with a secret past. Really, the only thing that makes us different is that I had All Might to look up to and keep me going. That's why you're so determined to carry on All Might's legacy." Achako finally understood what was driving him. "It's not for him as much as it is for Tenko." Dick lifted his head and looked earnestly at Rarika. "I don't want anyone else growing up in a world without someone to look up to. They need someone that can tell them not to be afraid, that someone is there for them, and that they can be a hero. All Might was that for me. I want to be that for them." The sadness in Dick's eyes slowly faded, and Achako could see that determined spirit taking its place. She reached down and grabbed his hand in solidarity, trying to match that determination in her own way. "Then you're going to be that type of hero for them, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to help you achieve that goal, Rarika." Dick sounded overwhelmed by the sudden support. "We've been helping each other since day one, Dick." She gave him a reassuring smile. I'm not about to stop now. Tears threatened to break through as Dick tried to maintain his composure. Thank you so much, Rarica. As the two sat and took in the snowy view around them, Ichako felt a renewed sense of hope and purpose. It was a small step, but maybe his healing can finally begin now. Either way, I'm going to be there for him to help him through whatever comes next. Chapter 18. It was a quiet morning for the Symbols of Peace Hero Agency. The hallways and apartments were peaceful, the occupants either sleeping or out on patrol. In the lower levels of the building, however, one member of the team was creating quite the racket. Sparks flew and metal melted as Melissa worked tirelessly on the equipment she had designed. She placed the arc welder off to the side and removed her protective face shield. A frustrated sigh escaped her lips as she wiped the sweat from her brow. Hopefully that will fix it. The previous night, Melissa had tuned into Dick's live interview discussing the footage released by the Hero Public Safety Commission. She watched the pain on his face as those horrible memories were brought to the surface. It reminded her of his first few weeks on the island, when the trauma was still fresh. It took so long to get him to a point where he could keep the emotions in check. Now, between the nightmares and this interview, how far back have we gone? After the interview had ended, she began monitoring the chems and fulfilling her duties as Aegis. She got the system online just in time to hear Kyoka updating Rarica on Arandon's interrogation, and everything went downhill from there. She watched the tracker on Dick take off from Kurado City, followed swiftly by Rarica. Then, over a remote area of the map, a snowstorm caused their signals to vanish. Knowing the severity of Dick's condition and the distance between him and Rarica, Melissa feared the worst. Remote areas with no signal. With interference. I should have taken those into account while designing the system. She knew deep down that Rarica was fully capable of taking care of Dick, but her concern for him mixed with the frustration at her own shortcomings sent her on a mission to make sure this communication breakdown never happened again. As she finished running diagnostics on the upgrades to the main system, she rebooted the program to see if she had been successful. The computer screen flickered and flashed as the updates took effect, and then the main program opened, showing the location of each of the on-duty heroes. Dick and Aravati. Dick and Aravati. The young scientist mumbled to herself as she scanned the map. There they. Wait, that can't be right. This says that they're. The sound of the lab door opening caused Melissa to spin around. Relief washed over her as the accuracy of her upgrades were confirmed. Dick. She ran over and tearfully embraced her friend before he had time to react. I couldn't get in touch with you after the interview, and then you both dropped off the face of the earth. I was so worried. It's okay, Melissa, Dick returned the hug. I'm fine now. What happened out there? I pushed myself too hard trying to get back and help Kekken, he said sheepishly. I had a relapse mid-flight. Just like you said, I caught up to him just in time, Rarica chimed in. We found a place to wait out the storm while he recovered. I would have called in, but we didn't have access to a phone, and the chems weren't connecting well. Hopefully that won't be a problem anymore. Melissa gestured toward the mess of tools and scraps that had occupied her for the last several hours. She turned her attention back to Dick, frustration welling up inside her. Seriously, though, what were you thinking? I didn't send Rarica with you just so you could ditch her at the first sign of trouble. I get that you don't want us to worry about you, but there are some fights I can't win on my own. I know the calmness with which he said these words caught her off guard. A small smile appeared on his face that further confused her. She turned to Rarica, who nodded knowingly. He told me everything, she said with a sad kind of smile, about All for One, the Vestige Realm, and Tenko. Melissa was taken aback by this revelation. She had hoped Dick would open up eventually, but after their conversation the day before, she hadn't expected it so quickly. "You were right," Dick shrugged as if conceding defeat. "If I want my friends to trust me to help them, I need to trust them to help me. I know I'm not out of the woods yet. I'm still going to struggle with these memories." He put a hand on both Rarica's shoulder and her own, "but I'm done struggling alone. Thank you, both of you, for not giving up on me." Melissa looked at him, the sheepish grin on his face replaced by a full-on smile. It was different from the ones she had seen him wear recently, however. This one didn't feel forced or like he was puffing up a front. He wasn't smiling to trick his fear or himself anymore. He was acknowledging and accepting the fear for what it was, and smiling in defiance of it. She remembered what Gran Torino had said on the day of Uncle Mike's funeral. The people in this world who can smile are always the strongest. She smiled at Dick and nodded in affirmation. The sound of the lab door opening grabbed her attention as the trio turned to see Kyoka, out of breath with one hand leaning on the doorframe. "Brace yourselves," she managed to say before an explosion sent smoke and dust into the room. "Where's he?" Bakugo's gruff voice howled through the cloud of debris. "Kekon, you're okay," Dick called back as the smoke began to settle. In a flash, Bakugo reached through the dust, grabbed Dick by the collar, and pinned him against the wall. "Don't give me that, you damn nerd." Bakugo spat in his face. "If you had been doing your job instead of getting dolled up to have a nervous breakdown on national news, none of this would have happened." "Oh, so you're saying you needed Dick's help yesterday?" Kyoka walked over from the door with a smug smile on her face. "Shut up, ears. You weren't much use to me either, so you don't have room to talk. You'll have to forgive him." Yaozu entered the room, rubbing her forehead in a mixture of frustration and embarrassment. "He's been like this ever since Andon got the better of him during the interrogation. Maybe if my interrogation partner wasn't such a pushover." "Hey, watch it." Kyoka jumped to her defense. "Thanks to Yamono, we found out that Andon was working for someone. All you got was a panic attack." Bakugo glared at the girl before releasing his grip on Dick's collar. "Fine. If you extras think you can do a better job, have at it. I'm going back on patrol." He turned and stormed toward the door, but Dick caught up to him and grabbed his shoulder before he could leave. "Tekken, I know what her quirk can do. It can really mess with your head," he said with concern. "What did Andon show you that has you so on edge?" Bakugo stood silently for several seconds, not turning to face anyone. He took a deep breath. "I lost," came the quiet response as he shrugged Dick's hand off his shoulder and exited the lab. "Out of my way, raccoon eyes," his voice echoed down the hall. "Well, excuse me," Ashido said indignantly as she walked through the door. She turned to the others. "I heard the explosion and came to investigate, but I can see it was just Mr. Gloom and Boom there. Everyone okay?" "More or less," Melissa responded, brushing some stray hair out of her eyes. Looking at the group, she could see the concerned expression on Dick's face as he watched Bakugo leave, and Yaozu was clearly affected by the biting remarks from the troubled young man. "Hey, don't listen to him, Yamono," Kyoka tried to cheer up her friend. "He was way out of line. No, he's right. I was so focused on keeping the prisoner calm that I lost sight of the threat she posed," she responded with resignation. "Sorry, I need to step outside and clear my head." "Excuse me with that." Yaozu quietly shuffled out of the lab. "I swear, one of these days I'm gonna give him a piece of my mind," Kyoka snarled as she turned to Dig. "The police want to follow up interrogation as soon as possible. You feeling up to it, Midoriya?" "Absolutely. Let's get to the bottom of this," he said confidently. "You want to come to Rarica?" "I would, but I probably won't be much help," the girl stifled a yawn. I didn't get any sleep last night, so I'm completely wiped out. You kept her busy, huh, Midoriya? Ashido insinuated with a sly smirk. And no, not like that. The two nervously exclaimed in unison as their faces instantly turned a deep shade of red. Melissa had to cover her mouth to keep from laughing as they frantically tried to clarify the statement. All right, we get the point, Kyoka smiled and rolled her eyes. She then used her earphone jacks to prod Dick towards the door. Come on, Romeo. We don't want to keep the police waiting. Rarika followed the two out of the lab, probably eager to leave the awkward situation. After they were gone, Ashido turned to Melissa with a satisfied smile on her face. That never gets old, she chuckled as she wiped a tear from her eye. Some things never change, Melissa grinned. But after the progress Dick made last night, I guess anything is possible. And inside us she sat down at the interrogation table once more. She felt cold metal against her arms as her wrists and ankles were strapped into the chair. Once again, her vision was obscured, this time by a full face mask secured around her head. After the incident the previous evening, the officers weren't taking any chances with her quirk. I guess I only have myself to blame for that. I could argue it was in self-defense, but I doubt anyone would buy that. As she sat in the isolating darkness, she took in the sounds around her. The hum of the lights overhead, the movement of the two officers preparing the space, the door to the interrogation room opening, and another set of footsteps entering the room. Those won't be necessary, officer, a young man's voice calmly asserted itself into the scene. Sorry, sir, but they're a mandatory safety measure, one of the officers responded firmly. I see, the visitor responded with a sigh. Well, thank you for your help. I can take it from here. And then listened to the officer's heavy footsteps get quieter as they exited the room and shut the door behind them. It was just the stranger and now. Only the sound of their breathing and the fluorescent lights broke the silence. After a few moments, he began to move around the room, his clunky steps approaching on her right and stopping just behind her. The disembodied voice quietly pondered. Ah, there we go. And panicked a little as she felt him touch her head, but was relieved when she felt the headgear loosen up and fall from her face. Her eyes snapped shut as they were assaulted by the light from the room. She reflexively tried to reach for her eyes to rub them, only to feel the restraints keeping her arms firmly fixed to the chair. Let me get those for you, the voice came again. And suddenly felt that her arms were able to move, and she quickly brought her hands to her eyes. Clearly you weren't briefed on what I can do, huh? She said sarcastically to her unknown visitor. Oh, believe me, I'm fully aware of what you're capable of, he said patiently. Erendon squinted into the room, allowing her eyes to slowly adjust. She was stunned when the blurry figure came into focus and she realized her visitor's identity. It's Dick, right? She asked. The green-haired young man in front of her nodded. But why? You of all people should know the risk that you're taking right now. I could put you out of commission for days at this range. Yes, you could, he responded matter-of-factly, but the fact that you're concerned leads me to believe you won't be that. Besides, it would be difficult to understand you with that thing on air. And then stretched and ran her hands through her hair, enjoying the lack of restraint for as long as it lasted. She looked at the young hero, who just sat patiently, as if he was waiting for her to be ready. The sincerity on his face and his unexpected act of kindness made her uncomfortable. Look, I'm sorry about the other night. I wasn't actually aiming at you when I activated my quirk, and I definitely didn't expect it to hit you as hard as it did. I know I wasn't your target, but it was either me or earphone jack, and she has more responsibilities than I do. His vague response still communicated volumes to Errington. There is more at stake than just her sanity, huh? He smiled and nodded. She just stared at him, trying to get a read on this strange hero. And you'd do it again, wouldn't you? In a heartbeat, he responded without hesitation. And inside. You know, the guards let me watch a replay of your interview last night. I think I know what my quirk latched on to, she said apologetically. Honestly, there wasn't much to dredge up that wasn't already there. Dick leaned forward in his chair, resting his elbows on the table and his chin on his folded hands. If anything, your attack forced me to face demons that I had been trying to hide for the better part of the last year. In a strange way, I'm almost grateful. His face took on a more serious expression, but that doesn't change the fact that you hurt innocent people. I know. She hung her head in exasperation. I told your buddies yesterday that I didn't mean to hurt anyone. They filled me in on your back, showing the reasoning from the previous session, Dick responded. I actually want to pick up where they left off, and felt her throat tighten. Like I said before, your guy jumped me. I was working alone. It was all me. I just wanted to test you guys, see what made you so special. That might have been your personal motivation, but there's something else you're hiding. The young hero leaned closer, looking intently at her. She tried to keep her heart rate down, knowing that earphone girl was probably monitoring her from the other room. After a few moments of examination, he sat back, and his stare softened. You're scared, aren't you? There was an air of concern in Dick's voice that suddenly made her feel less nervous. Everyone's afraid of something, she said quietly. I guess I'm no exception. The person you're working for? He asked. Erin hesitated before slowly nodding her head. Dick looked at her kindly. Then help us catch them. I can't say you won't be held responsible for your actions, but any information you provide can only help your case. Erin breathed deeply as she thought through her situation. I can't, she said with a heavy sigh, and not because I don't want to. I literally have no useful information on my employer. All of our communications are over an encrypted frequency. They never speak in their own voice. All payments are left at a drop site in cash. They operate with complete and total anonymity. How did you end up working for them if you know nothing about them? My brother was actually the first one to make contact. He was a pilot who specialized in making discreet deliveries. He found an anonymous job online that paid well, and he was hired full-time after successfully completing it. I was brought on shortly afterwards. He might be able to give us some more information then. Do you know where he is now? Dick asked earnestly. He's... A wave of anguish crashed into Erin as tears began stinging her eyes. He's dead. He was doing a job about a week ago, but he never made it back. The next morning, there was a news report about a small, unidentified plane crash. There wasn't much left of the craft in the footage, but I could tell it was his plane. She pounded her fist into the table. He was the only thing I had left in this world, and that faceless coward took him from me. Your employer. How can you be sure? When I arrived in Musuta for the other night, I called in to give a status update. Erin stared angrily at the table as she recalled what had happened. They said that I would end up like my brother if I messed up, and then, all of a sudden, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even move. The only thing I could do was stand there as an intense pain pierced through my head. I honestly thought I was going to die, but the call ended, and the torture stopped. And you think that's what happened to your brother? Nagatobu was an amazing pilot, she replied wistfully. For him to crash so catastrophically would have required outside interference. She looked intently at the hero sitting in front of her. I don't know if it's our employer's quirk or something else, but there's no doubt in my mind that they're responsible. Do you know what job your brother was working on the night of his crash? He didn't share any details with me. Something about plausible deniability if things went south. At the time, I thought he was protecting me from the cops. She hung her head sadly, but now I know otherwise, and you said they threatened to kill you if you failed your mission, right? The hero gave her a worried look as she nodded. What counted as a failure? There were only two things I wasn't supposed to do: give the authorities any information, and hit you with my quirk. She smiled ironically to herself. I guess I've failed twice now. The room was silent for a few minutes. Erin kept her eyes on Dick as he sat, lost in thought. It's not a lot to go on. I wish I could do more, but I'd probably be dead already if I knew anything else. Dick suddenly looked up at her. I'm going to talk to the authorities and see what options we have for keeping you safe, he said compassionately. Why? Erin was shocked. You said it yourself. I hurt innocent people. I barely deserve the protection I'm already getting. I'm not condoning your actions, and there will be consequences for them, but you're pawing in someone else's game. Determination filled the young hero's eyes. Until we know the big picture, I don't want any more victims. He stood up and walked over to her, picking up the blackout mask as he did so. He stopped and knelt down next to her chair, looking her in the eyes. We're going to bring them to justice. You don't have to be afraid anymore, Erin me, she said quietly. Dick looked a little confused. That's my real name, Mistigami. Thank you for your help, Miss Stigami, the young hero said with a smile as he got to his feet. All Yuma could do was nod, too overwhelmed by what had just transpired to form any more words. As the mask went over her face, she was reminded of her original goals and ideals, and how far she had fallen from them. The guilt from her recent actions constricted around her spirit as the headgear was securely fastened around her head. However, as the darkness engulfed her and the departing footsteps left her alone in the void, a new feeling rose up amid the confusion, a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Chapter 19. So you just took off her mask and looked her in the eye. So manly. Kirishima gave Midori a hearty slap on the back, causing him to wince in pain. After his interrogation of Yuma, Erin and Stigami, Dick and her phone Jack returned to the agency, where a few of the off-duty heroes eagerly waited for an update in the break room. By owning up to your fears and facing them, you were able to take away her power over you, Tokuyama mused as he shared an apple with Dark Shadow. A bold move, Midoriya and a risky one. Melissa placed her hands on her hips. After what you went through the last time, I thought you would have been more careful. Based on the info Kyoka gave me from the first interrogation, it sounded like hitting me was an accident, and since it was so recent, I don't know that another dose would have had that much of an effect on me, Izuku replied defensively. All that aside, it felt like the right thing to do. I mean, if we expect the villains we're interrogating to cooperate like rational people, shouldn't we treat them that way? Not everyone has the capacity, Midoriya, Asui said with a finger to her chin. Some of them are just too far gone, but well, I'd rather them prove the point than pass judgment prematurely. Too, Midoriya caught himself before messing up her name. Again. Gesundheit. Asui didn't miss a beat. Midoriya couldn't tell whether she was smirking in amusement or grimacing in exasperation. At this point, all that matters is that Midoriya's approach worked, Kyoka interjected. We got some straight answers from Meriden, and the police were able to corroborate some of their findings at the plane crash with her testimony. Sounds like quite the productive afternoon. Almost sorry I missed it. Rarika yawned and stretched as she continued to wake up. Izuku was glad to see that she was able to get some rest after what he had put her through the night before. The crash was followed by a pretty substantial explosion. There wasn't a lot of evidence to point towards whose plane it was, Kyoka continued as she thumbed through some paperwork that the police had given them. They were able to pull registration documents on Stigami's brother, and, so far, the debris has matched up with the plane they had on record for him. She produced an image of the aircraft in question and handed it to the group. It was examined and passed around until it stopped at Kirishima, whose eyes got wide as he stared at the picture. "Rarika, look at this." As she peered over his shoulder, her face took on the same surprised expression. "That looks like the plane that dropped you to and change up over the shopping district during last week's heist." Dick finished their thought, having already been briefed on the theory by the police. "Based on your testimony after the incident, the plane's trajectory as it left Musutofo lines up with the location of the crash. But if that really was Enden's brother hauling tags portal, and he was working a job for their boss," Kirishima thought out loud. After a pause, Melissa spoke up. "There's a good chance that their employer was behind both the heist and the panic plague. But those incidents were so different." Rarika looked deeply concerned. "Aside from the Stigamis, the two jobs have almost nothing in common. What are they hoping to achieve in all of this? Isn't it obvious, Ribbit?" From the tone of her voice, Midoriya could tell that Tsu had already figured it out. After a few moments of silent thought, she spoke again. "For both incidents, we were the ones on patrol, Ribbit. They're testing us." "Exactly." Midoriya nodded in affirmation. "The police have seen this before. A new hero will arrive in an area, and there will be a spike in crimes in the same region, almost as if the villains are seeing what they can get away with under the new guy. Knowing the enemy, understanding their quirks and habits, and seeing how they respond under pressure," Tokoyama said quietly as he tossed the remainder of the apple toward his ravenous counterpart. "All of that information would be invaluable to any group of criminals trying to keep ahead of the law." "But why the sudden escalation?" Kirishima asked. "I mean, it went from robbing a bank to blind chaos pretty quick. Shouldn't there have been a few steps in between if they were testing us?" Dick hadn't given his first interview yet when the heist happened. Melissa looked as if everything was coming together in her mind as well. "Before the heist, you were just an inexperienced group of graduate heroes. But after the interview, we were the heroes that stopped the leading all for one," Rarika said, the realization making her eyes go wide. If Dick's claims were true, anything less than pandemonium wouldn't have been enough of a challenge. "Well, let's just hope we sent the freak a strong enough message by dealing with Enden." Kyoko leaned back in her chair. "If we're lucky, maybe they'll take the hint and stop calling us out." A phone call is here. Midoriya quickly fumbled to get his phone out of his pocket. "You know, Midoriya, most phones have this feature called vibrate mode. You should try it sometime," Kyoko said with a sarcastic grin. Midoriya laughed apologetically as he scurried out of the room to answer the call. "Midoriya, I'm so glad that I was able to get a hold of you." Ken's voice came through loud and clear. However, its usual optimism was replaced with concern. "You left so quickly after the interview, I didn't have a chance to make sure you were doing okay." "Sorry about that, Ken. We were needed back in Musutofo on short notice, but everything is fine now. Oh, that's a relief. Honestly, I had no idea that the footage would hit you as hard as it did," and Miss Rarika said you were dealing with the side effects of the nightmare quirk too. "It's a miracle you made it through the interview at all." "I should have been upfront with you about that," Izuka admitted. "I just knew that the people needed answers, and I didn't want to let them down." "Well, no harm, no foul," Ken kindly dismissed the apology. "If anything, your emotional reaction made the interview that much more sincere. The public outcry has calmed down, and you have a strong foothold in their hearts and minds. However, this whole thing did get me thinking about you and your team's well-being." "Our well-being?" You all have been through a lot lately, especially with everything that happened during the panic plague. I want to make sure that you are all handling the stress and pressure without issue. So I'm sending our company's counseling specialist over to your agency tomorrow to meet with each of you. Counseling. Isn't that a bit much? Midoriya wasn't sure how to feel about this. No offense, Ken, but some of the team might view that as a bit invasive. Oh no, nothing like that, Ken apologized. You see, shortly after we opened our building to the hero agencies, I realized that it wasn't just finances they were struggling with. Their minds and emotions were a mess, bogged down by the trauma they had experienced. That's when Geshin Kenju was assigned to us as part of the response to all the chaos. Even though he was still a third year at UA High, he went to great lengths getting the heroes back on their feet, helping them sort through the chaos inside them, and allowing them to operate in the field with better clarity of mind. We hired him full-time once he graduated the following year. And he's the one you're sending over tomorrow. As a part of our family, you and your team have access to his completely confidential services whenever any of you may need them. I know you all have been through a lot lately, and there's likely even more unresolved issues from the all-for-one situation. I highly recommend each of you consider giving him a chance. Coming off my own therapy session with Rarika, I can't deny that this sort of thing could be helpful for the others. I can't be the only one dealing with repressed memories and regrets. I'll let the team know he'll be here tomorrow and do my best to encourage everyone to schedule visit between shifts. Thank you for having an open mind about this, Midoriya. I know it'll help you focus better on your work. I hope so. We've got a lot of loads to follow up on with our current cases, so we need all the help we can get. Oh, have the culprits been talkative? Ken sounded pleased and intrigued. We'd had more cooperation than expected, but I can't go into too many details right now. I completely understand. I'll make sure that Kenju is as unobtrusive as possible. Keep me posted on your work, and I'll let you know when another opportunity to step into the spotlight comes up. Thanks, Ken. Talk to you later. Midoriya ended the call, realizing what he had just agreed to. As he walked back into the break room, he found Tokuyama sitting alone in one of the lounge chairs with Dark Shadow curled up in his lap. Where'd everyone go? The others are preparing for their patrols. I was just enjoying a few minutes of solitude before doing the same. A contented grin spread across the young man's beak. How did your call with Mr. Rigate go? Dick sighed as he sat in a chair next to Tokuyama. He's sending a shrink over to the office to evaluate our mental and emotional status. He got concerned after seeing my struggle during the interview. Psychiatric counseling seems a bit unnecessary, that's what I said, but Ken was very insistent. I can see the benefit for me personally, but I don't know anything about this Kenju guy Kenju. Tokuyama's head perked up, his interest peaked as in Geshin Kenju. Why yeah. You know him. Kenju was in the class ahead of us, he explained. He helped me work through some things after my participation in the Gunga Mountain Village rally. Midoriya was a little skeptical. You never struck me as someone who would seek out that type of help. Oh, you can thank Moneta and Kaminari for our first session. Dark Shadow let out a dissatisfied growl. The school had sanctioned some late-night training sessions for one of the new first years and myself, and those two were bound and determined to prove that she and I were doing more than just training. Dick silently took all this information in. It was rare for Tokuyama to be this forthright with anyone, especially about this sort of thing. He finally opened his mouth. Were you doing more than just training? Tokuyama just glared at him. At two, Midoriya. He shook his head and rolled his eyes. Anyway, they dragged me to see Kenju, who specializes in relationship and emotional analyses. Thankfully, he understands the value of privacy. He may have a colorful personality, but he is definitely good at what he does. There's no one I would trust more to be doing these evaluations for our team with the help of Tokuyima's endorsement. The turnout for the little therapy workshop was much larger than expected. Almost every slot on the sign-up sheet was taken, leaving Midoriya with one of the last sessions for the day. I'm not sure what I'm getting myself into here, but if it'll help me continue to work through these memories and nightmares, I'm willing to give it a shot. After a few minutes of waiting, the door to the temporary office opened as Tokuyama wrapped up his appointment. "I'm glad you took my advice and didn't give up on that one," a voice called after him from inside the room. "The difference since the last time I saw you is like night and day. You've made a lot of progress, and I appreciate the help." Kenji Tokuyama backed out of the room. "It's been good to see you again, fulfilling your goals as a hero. I wish you the best of luck in the future." He turned to shut the door and gave Midoriya a small nod. As he made his way down the hall, Dark Shadow poked his hand out and gave Izuku a quick thumbs up. Dick smiled and turned toward the office door. As he reached out to knock, the handle turned and the door suddenly swung open. Standing in the doorway was a slim man looking him straight in the eye. Slick, black hair sat atop the counselor's tan face, offset by the 5 o'clock shadow that accentuated his angular jaw. A glimmer of light drew Midoriya's attention to the man's attire. He wore dark jeans, a black turtleneck, and a black blazer, the latter of which had opalescent pinstripes that changed colors as the light danced across them. "Well, what do we have here?" "Izuku Midoriya in the flesh," the man exclaimed with a smile. "Ken said you had a big team, but I didn't think it would take this long to get you in here." "Geshin Kanju, at your service," he bowed dramatically. "Glad to have you here," Dick reciprocated with a slight bow of his own. "Tokuyama said you went to school with us. I'm surprised I didn't see you around more." "Well, we didn't have the big three, and we weren't making nearly as many waves as your class, so we kinda took on the mantle of the forgotten class." That wasn't intentional. Midoriya felt embarrassed and a little guilty at the reminder of how much attention he and his classmates drew towards themselves. "Sorry about that. Are you kidding? It was a blessing. All the media attention, expectations, pressure, ain't nobody got time for that." Kenji waved dismissively as he casually flipped through some paperwork. "Most of us had already made our connections during our first year, so it didn't hurt our prospects at all. If that's what you're concerned about, well, that's a bit of a relief." Midoriya grinned nervously. "So, what is it exactly that you do?" Tokuyama vouched for you, but he was a little light on the specifics. "It would probably be easier for me to just show you." The young man gestured toward a chaise lounge chair in the room. Dick took a seat on it, feeling a little uneasy at the lack of details he had. Kenji dimmed the lights in the room and turned to face his patient. Upon turning around, Dick could see the counselor's hands glowing with a purple aura. The young hero clenched his teeth and leaned away apprehensively, which produced a chuckle from Kenji. "All right, take a deep breath and relax. You're in good hands. I'm not gonna hurt you. I won't kill you. I want to watch your face as the last glimmer of hope fades from your eyes." The memory of All for One reasserted itself into Dick's mind, causing his heart to race and his breathing to quicken. He instinctively felt the urge to lash out at the villain, but also realized that the threat wasn't real. "Keep it together, Izuku. Breathe." He forced himself to inhale deeply and slowly in an effort to calm himself down. "Oh joy, I can see why Ken wanted me over here." Kendra looked at him with a concerned expression. "Let's see if we can unravel what's really troubling you." The young man suddenly thrust his glowing hands into Midoriya's chest. He flinched as he braced for impact, but nothing happened. There was no pain or discomfort, just a warm, tingly feeling. Izuku looked down to see a glow coming out of his chest where the man's hands had entered. With a swift motion, Kenji yanked his hands out, pulling along with them something that Dick had not been expecting. He stared awestruck at an assortment of tendrils emanating from the glowing spot on his chest. Each of the threads looked different from the others. Colors, size, length, none of them were exactly the same. They all flowed through the air, weaving their way around the room in a mesmerizing dance. "Kenji," he managed to say, "what am I looking at here?" "These are your heartstrings," Kenji explained as he began examining the ribbons. "My quirk gives me the ability to pull out a physical representation of a person's relationships and passions, allowing me to examine the interactions between them and help a person identify any strengths, weaknesses, or conflicts that may be affecting them. Most of the time, it feels like I'm pulling out a pair of earbuds that someone crammed in their pocket, so I have to spend a lot of time untangling the strings before I can give any useful input. But you..." A look of surprise passed over the man's face as he looked at Dick's collection. "You have the most organized set of heartstrings I've ever seen. For someone that's struggling as much as you clearly are, you definitely have a good handle on what's important to you." "That sounds like a good thing, but what does all of it mean?" Midoriya was still trying to wrap his head around everything that he was seeing and hearing. Let's start at the beginning, and we can walk through this." Kenji plucked a decently sized ribbon out of the air. It originated directly from Midoriya's chest and glimmered in shades of green and pink. "Let's see." "Ooh. Your mom. Inko, right?" Dick nodded, amazed that he could get all of that information from this glowing strand. "This is actually fairly common. Parental and family relationships tend to be more separated from the rest of our relationships, not as easily cut off or affected by our lives. Your relationship with your mom seems pretty healthy, although it looks a little strained during your childhood years. I was a late bloomer when it came to my quirk." Midoriya tactfully tried to fill in the backstory. "The doctors actually thought I was going to be quirkless, which crushed me. My mom tried to be supportive, but it wasn't what I needed to hear. Tried to get used to the fact that you couldn't be a hero, huh?" Kenji read between the lines. "I've seen that one before. Lots of people with weak or unheroic quirks get the same spiel from their parents. They mean well, but there's more than one way to be a hero. And this..." Kenji squinted at a thread that was wrapped around Inko's ribbon. It couldn't have been thicker than a strand of hair. "Ooh, your dad's job kept him out of your life. You know he did it for you guys, so you love him for that, but you don't know the guy. That's why it's so thin. If you weren't family, it probably would have been cut short a long time ago, and you're getting all of that just by looking at these heartstrings." Midoriya asked skeptically, even though the therapist was completely correct in his assertions. "PFT, please, family relations are typically the easy ones to read. We're just getting to the good stuff." Kenji released his parents' strands into the air and grabbed the two remaining threads coming from his heart. The two sizable cords wrapped tightly around each other. One glowed a bright white while the other flashed hues of red, white, and blue. Dick knew what the latter was before Kenji even began his explanation. "I see this one a lot. All might had a profound impact on a lot of our generation, and judging from how tightly wound these two are," he gestured to the white cord, "it looks like he kicked off your drive to become a hero. This one's important. Most of the other threads will be looking at our relationships with people or things. This heartstring represents your core values, the ideals that give you direction and keep you moving forward. Keep that in mind as we move along." As Kenji continued examining the heartstrings, Izuku found himself recognizing the represented relationships as they worked through his life. He found Kepkin's orange thread that, despite being consistent in strength, was constantly framed as a representation of a tense friendship. A thread representing his connection with One for All broke off from All Mights, glowing with a fluid rainbow of color. Things really exploded after that as a multitude of threads representing the people he connected with the UA began breaking themselves around the central chords of All Might, One for All, and his drive to be a hero. Very quickly, all of the threads had formed a thick and sizable rope that looked capable of pulling the heaviest of loads. Then came the Yak incident, and Midoriya watched as the rope was rearranged. The strings representing his friends and mentors braided together into a new rope with Rarika's constant support and Kepkin's endless drive at the core. The flowing hues of the One for All ribbon became more rigid and divided, signifying the start of his training with the vestiges. This string formed another rope with All Might's thread and a new one representing Tenko and Dig's determination to save him. These two braided ropes spiraled tightly around the white cord of Midoriya's heroic ideals, representing the different paths he and his friends took on their way to the same goal, the end of All for One's reign of terror. "You've been through the ringer, my friend," Kanju said as they reached the end of the conflict. "I've never seen anyone so connected to their quirk or their friends. You really used that to get you through those dark times even if we were all separated during that time. I don't think I would have been able to make it without any of them." Dick couldn't help but smile at how proud he was of everything they had accomplished. "Yeah," Kanju sighed. "It's too bad you're about to screw it all up." "Wait, what?" Dick was startled at the sudden shift in tone. Kanju stepped aside to reveal the state of his heartstrings. Up until this point, everything had been organized, strong, and unified, but that all changed during Dick's recovery. The braided cords that had been so strong began to loosen and move away from the white thread of his goals. The ropes began to pull apart as individual threads changed size and faded in vibrancy. Some threads were cut off altogether as new threads were added. In the end, 3 new ropes were formed, none as tightly formed as the ones from before. Branching off to the left were the cords for One for All and All Might, joined by a new thread for Ken as they strove to uphold All Might's legacy. Veering to the right were the strands for his friends, weaving together as they pushed forward toward their dreams of being heroes. Between these two was the ribbon of Dick's ideals. Up until now, it had been straight and true, but now it oscillated between the other 2 ropes, almost as if it couldn't make up its mind as to where it belonged. This was accompanied by Tenko's strand, trying to keep up with and bolster Midoriya's resolve. A new familial cord for Melissa spiraled around these two, almost trying to minimize the intensity of the direction changes. "I have no idea what's going on here," Midoriya said with great concern. "Yeah, I noticed," Kanju gave a curt response as he intently examined the mess that floated before him. "Best as I can figure, you've lost your way." He turned back to the earlier arrangement to review. "Before, your goals were mutually beneficial. Being a hero meant living up to All Might's legacy, which meant defeating All for One, which helped your friends. In turn, you and your friends fed off each other as you all trained to be better heroes, ultimately helping you in your fight against All for One. Whether intentionally or not, all of your relationships were working toward a singular goal, but once that goal was gone." Kanju paused and looked at Midoriya with understanding eyes. "Well, I'm sure you felt the resulting confusion." Izuku nodded as he began to understand what was happening. "Taking on the mantle of the symbol of peace means going all out with my quirk. If I do that though, I'll overshadow my friends, their efforts, and their dreams, and this divergence is putting a strain on the cord through your." Kanju gestured to the sinusoidal white cord between the 2 opposing rods. "You want to be a hero that everyone can rely on, but if you pick one direction over the other, people will fall through the cracks, whether it be your friends or the citizens you want to serve. I'd wager a guess that the stress of this subconscious game of tug-of-war isn't helping your nightmares much." Midoriya just stared at the threads hovering before his eyes. Being able to visualize it all did help clarify what he had been feeling recently, but it didn't seem to present a solution for him. What are my options here? Well, you could just keep going the way you have been, the therapist shrugged. The pressures of life and responsibilities will continue to pile on, adding to the stress, and you'll eventually tear yourself apart mentally and emotionally. I've seen it happen before. Not pretty, you call that an option? Well, it technically is, but I wouldn't recommend it. May I continue? He locked eyes with Dick, clearly put off by the interruption. Dick quickly nodded, and Kanju got back to business. The other option would be to bite the bullet and pick a path. He pointed at the two cables, tugging in opposite directions of each other. Either way, you'll lose something, whether it's friends, symbol status, or whatever, but at least you won't be a completely useless nutcase. The response hung in the air for a few moments. It was honest and unrestrained, but Dick could feel the sincere concern with which it was delivered. And those are the only choices I have. Partial failure or complete failure. Dick sighed. Normally, yes. There's another option, but it's much more difficult to pull off, and most people in your position are struggling just to make it through each day. Kanju began feeding the heartstrings back into Midoriya's chest. You, however, seem to have stumbled onto the last option on your own. He held back the last bit of the cords and focused on the ends. There, Midoriya could see a solitary strand deviating from the rest. It jumped out of the friendship cord and darted over toward the middle. Once it reached Hizuki's core ideals, it tied itself in a knot around the white cord and continued tightly wrapping around it until the two were almost indistinguishable. Dick felt a warmth build up inside him as he realized whose thread it was. Rarika, that's a very special thread, Kanju said quietly. Most of the time, threads that form our core values arise there naturally. Things influence us, change our perspective, and are incorporated. As time goes on, things change, our view of the world broadens, and some things may become less important and branch off. He held the core thread close to Hizuki's face, focusing on the knot. That right there is not natural. You made a conscious decision that, no matter what happens to anything else, you don't want to lose this one. Midoriya looked intently at the knot. It was small, but he could tell that it was secure. A small smile brightened his face as he began to understand just how important that night in the woods really was. This is your third option, and like I said, it's a most challenging one, Kanju continued. He grasped one of the two conflicting ropes in either hand. Both of these ropes represent noble and worthwhile goals, but both of them are missing things. This is just how your experiences cause them to intertwine. The glow around Kanju's hands intensified, and the two braided cables suddenly unraveled, leaving every thread floating on its own. You can pick a rope that was made for you, or you can choose to make your own. Instead of trying to align your ideals with what's important to you, make what's important to you part of your ideals. It'll require some effort and paradigm shifts on your part, but once you've prioritized what matters most to you, a path forward will be much clearer. Dick took in all of the individual strands of his relationships. It was daunting, but he knew that this was the right path forward. Suddenly, the threads retracted and rushed back towards him. As the last one disappeared, Dick held a hand over the glow on his chest until it faded. He looked up at Kanju as the lights in the room brightened. That was incredible. Being able to see all of it made everything so clear. Thank you. Please, don't get all emotional on me. Kanju held up his hands modestly. This is my passion. So many people put so much emphasis on the super part of our superhuman society that they lose sight of the human aspect of it. The bonds we form with others are some of the most important things in our lives. In a lot of ways, they're like our quirks. We can let them develop naturally, or we can work hard to nurture and strengthen them. Midoriya stood and walked toward the door as he let the words sink in. As he reached for the doorknob, he stopped and turned back. You know, even if it's not a combat-ready quirk, you're doing some great work. Kenji the counselor shrugged and put his hands in his pockets. Like I said, there's more than one way to be a hero. Dick smiled as he walked out of the room. Although he was still working out the specifics, he knew that he had a lot of work to do. And he couldn't wait to get started. Chapter 20 Midoriya yawned as he took a seat at the desk in his office the next morning. Excited as he was about the new possibilities Kenji had presented him, the restless night he just experienced reminded him that he was choosing the more difficult path. He was eager to make the necessary changes in his life, but he quickly realized that this was not something that would happen overnight. Still picturing the colorful heartstrings swirling around him, he decided to start off with small, incremental changes as he tried to bring the divergent threads in line with his core values. His first pass through the strings was promising until he found the first issue that needed to be addressed. This discovery led to a phone call, an added worried thought, and finally to the visitor that was wheeling into his office. "Thank you, Miss Shield," Ken said pleasantly as Melissa held the office door open for him. "It was very gracious of you to take time out of your busy schedule to show me around, and it was nice to finally meet you as well, Mr. Wright." Melissa smiled cheerfully. "I'm sure you two have a lot to talk about, so I'll let you get to it." She caught Midoriya's eyes and mouthed good luck from behind Ken before closing the door behind her. "This really is a nice building you have here, Midoriya. I can't blame you for opting out of the office program. Yeah, it hasn't been that long, but this is home. I couldn't picture myself anywhere else." Zuke smiled as he offered Ken a cup of tea. "While I'm glad I finally had the opportunity to visit, I'm sure you had more serious matters in mind when you called yesterday." He carefully took a sip of the steaming beverage. Kenji's evaluation must have been enlightening. It really was. "I think I finally know what's going on." Midoriya walked through what had been explained to him about the opposing goals and the strain they were putting on his core. As he went over the details, Ken intently listened to everything, taking it all in and processing it. "I see. So while other victims of the panic plague recovered fairly quickly," Ken said thoughtfully, "your symptoms persist because of this internal conflict that you've been dealing with since opening the agency." Midoriya nodded. "I want to be a reliable hero, someone who's there to save everyone in need. That goal has been the driving force in my life for as long as I can remember. When I saw so many things in my life at odds with that goal, I realized that I needed to reevaluate how each of those relationships was affecting me." "And what did you find?" Ken took another sip of his tea, the genuine interest in his eyes peering over the rim of the cup. "Well, that's just it. At first glance, everything seemed to line up. My friends all want to be the best heroes they can be and want the same for each other, so if anything, that's helping me towards my goal. All Might was the quintessential reliable hero, so striving to uphold his legacy also lines up. The bond I formed with my quirk after waiting so long for it to manifest pushes me to improve it and be a better hero by using it. So that just leaves me." Ken set his tea on the desk and leaned forward. "Being by far the newest relationship in your life, it would make sense that maybe I'm the cause of this tension." "That's what I thought too, but you also fit the profile. Just looking at it from a business standpoint, you wouldn't want to handle the brand of an unreliable hero. You would also want me to be the best I can be, and believe me, I do." Ken stroked his chin and leaned back in his wheelchair. "It seems like everything is working in your favor. So why the conflict?" "Kenji told me I would need to change my perspective on things in order to fix this. When we viewed the heartstrings, the cord representing my ideals kept bouncing between the other two ropes, almost as if it wanted to be a part of both but couldn't. So instead of asking why the two were opposed to my goals, I started asking why they were opposed to each other. That's when it hit me. It's the advertising plan. advertising plan. Ken looked across the desk with a puzzled expression. I know it sounds like a small thing, but if that's the case, a lot of my conflicts start making sense. Dick's nerves were going crazy inside of him. He had spent the night putting together a solid case for this conclusion, and now it all came down to this. During our first meeting, you said that the best path forward for the agency was for there to be a central figure for the public to rally around, and although you didn't say it outright, I knew you were hoping it would be me. All Might's protege carrying on his legacy just makes too much sense from a symbolic standpoint. I would be lying if I said the thought hadn't crossed my mind, and, as you know, my friends agreed with you. We did need a team leader, and that leader was me. However, as important as All Might's legacy is to me, my friends' goals and ambitions are just as important. They did just as much as I did during the 2 years of All for One's tyranny, and even more than me in the time since then. Yet they're not getting any credit. You said it yourself. Our efforts in the heist and the panic plague incidents aren't what's sticking with people. It's all about my defeat of All for One. And, yes, that is what happened, but it's not the whole story. My friends have been working tirelessly for years, and that effort shouldn't be overshadowed by my one moment of glory. The room was silent except for the nervous pounding of Midoriya's heart in his ears. The anticipation in the air made it hard for him to breathe. The enigmatic look on Ken's face was more than he could bear. What is he thinking? Did I blow it? I know he's the expert when it comes to these things, but I'm sure that this is the cause of my tension. I double-checked everything. This is the only thing that makes sense. Why does this feel like it's taking so long? Because it's difficult to process everything when you're mumbling like that, Ken responded with a twinkle in his eyes. Izuku's hand shot up to his mouth. I'm so sorry, came the muffled response. The advertiser just chuckled. I wish you had talked to me about this sooner, Midoriya. I know you're trying to respect my expertise, but this guilt isn't something I want you carrying with you every day. Ken flashed a reassuring smile. All of you are part of the Hennet advertising family. If your friends are that important to you, then they need to be treated accordingly. I'm sure that, together, we can come up with a solution that allows you to uphold All Might's memory and gives your team the attention they deserve. Dick let out a relieved sigh and deflated into his chair. Ken got a good laugh at the sight, and the young hero soon found himself laughing along. Over the course of the next few hours, the two brainstormed different strategies to make the agency's image more representative of the team as a whole. Midoriya was feeling much more optimistic about the situation as he walked Ken to his private helicopter on the building's rooftop landing pad. Thank you for being so understanding and willing to work through this, Ken, Midoriya said as the rotors began spinning. No, thank you for showing me the holes in my plan that need to be addressed, Ken shouted over the roar of the engine and the rushing wind. Don't worry. Your friends are in good hands. He gave an enthusiastic thumbs up as the door closed and the vehicle lifted off. Izuku felt the downdraft brush through his hair as he watched the helicopter fly off toward Karato City. He felt as if a burden had been lifted off his chest. Hopefully this one change will help quell the conflict inside me. Once the new strategy has been in effect for a while, I'll need to reevaluate to see if anything else needs. A small pressure in his head interrupted his thoughts. It was faint, but the feeling of his danger sense was unmistakable. This must be pretty significant for me to be feeling it from this far away. There's no time to see if anyone else is en route. If I don't act now, it might be too late. Dick immediately leapt into the air and blasted off in search of the disturbance. You don't have to be afraid anymore, and in Yuna's eyes shot open, only to be greeted by the dim isolation of her cell. She sat up on the hard mattress she had been napping on and stared groggily at the floor. As her body slowly woke up, her mind was already hard at work, contemplating a single thought. Why? Ever since her encounter with Dick the other day, her mind was consumed with this question. He showed her kindness when he took off her mask, sincerely and respectfully listened to her story, and was genuinely concerned when she brought up her brother's death and their employer's involvement. Then, with almost no hesitation, he advocated on her behalf for more protection during her incarceration. After everything I did to the city, and to him, why would he do any of that? Why? A small knock on her cell door interrupted her thoughts. Erlindo, Miss Stigami. One of the guards called through the door. I'm here to escort you to your new cell. If you would please put your mask on, we can get going. Iyuma looked across the room at the protective headgear laying on a small shelf on the wall. She walked over and picked it up, dreading the sensory deprivation that came with putting it on. She took a deep breath and slid the mask over her head, not wanting to jeopardize the unwarranted favor she was receiving. No sooner had she finished than the door to her cell opened. A set of hurried footsteps came up behind her and activated the locking mechanism on the headgear. Iyuma winced at the compression on her skull. The guard then led her to a chair and secured her arms and legs. Sorry about all this, the guard said apologetically. I'm not really one for causing unnecessary discomfort, but these are the procedures. No, I understand, Iyuma grunted as the straps dug into her ankles and wrists. With a lurch, the chair rolled forward toward her new accommodations. While the guard maneuvered her through the prison, Iyuma tried to get a feel for the size of the facility. She'd only actually seen the inside of her cell and the interrogation room, and those two places were fairly close together. Before too long, the two stopped for some reason. The sound of elevator doors opening gave Iyuma clues to what was going on. Of course, the maximum security wing is always on the lower level of these places. However, instead of descending, the young woman felt the sensation of the elevator rising higher. I'm not really supposed to do this, the guard said as if he sensed her confusion, but I thought you might like a last bit of fresh air before. His voice trailed off, and Iyuma thought she could hear a twinge of guilt in his voice. She heard the doors open, and as they exited the elevator, she felt the warmth of the afternoon sun on her, a pleasant contrast to the brisk winter air nipping at the exposed parts of her face. Oh, that feels good. Iyuma inhaled deeply. It's a shame that I can't see some sunlight before getting locked up again, but rules are rules. She was surprised when she felt the mask begin to loosen. It's just us up here, the guard said nervously. Just don't look around too much. The mask suddenly slid off her head, and her eyes were assaulted by blinding light. Iyuma flinched and squinted as she tried to figure out the best way to let that adjust to the brightness. I don't get it, she said to her escort. I can almost understand Dick doing this in a controlled environment, but you're taking a big risk here. Why? The guard let out a conflicted sigh. I was in the observation room during Dick's interrogation. Up until that point, you were just another villain that terrorized the city. But when he took your mask off, and I saw your face for the first time, I didn't see a monster. I saw a person, a young girl not far off from where my own daughter will be in a few years. His eyes began to adjust as she scoped out the scenery, being careful not to give her nervous benefactor any cause for alarm. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see the city along the coastland, ahead of her, the vast blue ocean. From what she could see without turning her head too much, the prison towered over the waves that surrounded it on all sides. It was no Tartarus, but it was still pretty sizable. She chuckled. Well, hopefully she's not here in a few years. No, I love my little girl, the guard said with determination. I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure she has a happy and fulfilling life. Honestly, that's why I've been trying to cooperate with you guys on the investigation. Iyumi was surprised to find herself opening up again. I didn't do everything I could for my brother while he was alive. Getting justice for him now is the only way I have left to do right by him, so you know the feeling. You'd go to any lengths to protect the ones you love." At this point, the man sounded like he was on the brink of tears. Iyuma nodded slowly, wondering why he was so worked up. "Well, that's a small relief. At least I know you'll understand why I have to do this. What do I?" The guard suddenly shoved her chair, sending it careening toward the edge of the rooftop. Iyuma could only watch in horror as she tipped over the side of the building and began a rapid descent towards the jagged rocks jutting out of the icy sea. As she approached her impending demise, she realized what had just happened. The boss called to the guard. "I don't know how, but they found a way to get rid of me, even in prison. Sorry, Nagatobu. I guess I really am a worthless failure." Without warning, the chair jerked back and began to slow down, stopping just shy of impaling Iyuma on a particularly sharp rock formation. The girl frantically tried catching her breath, relieved and amazed that she was still alive. As a wave of light-headed exhaustion crashed into her, a familiar voice called down to her. "It's okay, Miss Stigami. I've got you. Dig." Iyuma tried to turn her head to see what had happened, but the blackness of unconsciousness overtook her. "I swear, I had no other choice." The guard sat in the interrogation room across from Dick a few hours after the incident on the rooftop. His eyes were swollen with emotion, horrified by what he had done. "I got a phone call this morning, but it was from an unknown number, so I declined it. When I checked later, they had left a voicemail, but it was just dead air for the whole thing. With all due respect, sir, spam calls are pretty common. How is this related to your assassination attempt on Iyuma Stigami?" Dick was still trying to wrap his mind around everything that happened since his danger sense went off at the agency. "It led me right to the prison, just in time to see the guard pushing her over the edge. If I had been even a second later, this would have been a very different interrogation. It's gonna sound crazy, but as I listened to the voicemail, I was overcome by this feeling of dread." The guard stared at the table with panicked eyes. "I suddenly had this overwhelming fear that something terrible was going to happen to my family, and that the only way I could prevent it was." 2. The man broke down, burying his face in his hands. "But she wasn't posing a threat to your family. She had no way of affecting anyone outside this facility, and she hasn't attempted to use our quirk since our first interrogation. She's been extremely cooperative." "No, I know all that," the man said. "Even if I had been legitimately transferring her to a new cell, I still would have sneaked her upstairs for some fresh air. Because of the nature of her quirk, she doesn't get the same benefits as the other inmates. She may deserve to be in prison, but she doesn't deserve to be treated as subhuman. So if you knew she wasn't a threat, then why?" "Look, I can't explain it. I just knew that my family was going to be in danger if I didn't do something." A knock on the window sounded, and Midoriya stood up. "Thank you for your cooperation, sir." He turned to exit the interrogation room, leaving the officer in a tearful heap on the table. "He's telling the truth," Kyoka said as he closed the door to the observation room. "I know. I got that impression, too." Dick sadly looked through the one-way mirror at the devastated man. "I just don't understand how any of it makes sense actually. That's why I wanted to talk to you. I was able to do some analyses on the voicemail he mentioned. To the normal human ear, it definitely sounds like static." Kyoka smiled smugly as she pointed her jacks at herself. "Luckily for you, I don't have normal ears." "What did you find?" "Well, underneath the white noise, just below the range of normal hearing, there are a series of tones being played on loop for the duration of the recording. A subliminal message." Kyoka nodded in affirmation. "Because of my quirk, I can actually hear the tones, and since I was looking for something like this, I had my guard up." Even so, I still got an uneasy feeling about Denki and Jigen's safety after listening to it. I can easily see how someone who was unaware would be affected the same way he was. In fact, because he was likely listening intently to figure out who the voicemail was from, he probably opened himself up even more to its influence. Midoriya rubbed his chin. Do you think it was our mystery mastermind? It's definitely a possibility. Kyoka thoughtfully twirled one of her jacks around her finger. They've got a motive for wanting Shigami out of the picture, and, thanks to your testimony, we know they have the ability to mess with people's brains over the phone. I'd say that makes them our prime suspect. Now, is this guy's family actually in danger, or is it just a manipulated ploy? That's still up for debate. That's not a chance I'm willing to take, Izuku said adamantly. I'll try to get him a temporary leave of absence. Maybe I can pay for a cruise or something to get them off the radar until we figure out who's behind all this. What about Shigami? Kyoka had a look of concern on her face. The two turned as the door to the rest of the prison opened. Rarika stepped in with a reassuring smile on her face. I just got back from the infirmary, she said. Yumi's still unconscious, but her condition is stable. There was some bruising on her wrists and ankles from fighting against the restraints, but no serious injuries otherwise. Dick breathed a sigh of relief. At least I wasn't too late. Thanks for checking on her, Rarika. Dick, she can't stay here, Kyoka continued. If this person can arrange a hit on her this seamlessly, she's not going to be safe in any prison. But we can't release her either, Rarika said. Let alone the fact that she's still technically a criminal. We don't know what other resources her employer has at their disposal. She could be in worse danger on her own. Midoriya thought for a minute. She definitely needs protection, but the police force and prison system are too large and inefficient. Even knowing about the vulnerability, the chances of them being able to mitigate it completely are slim. She needs to be moved to a private location that has the resources to effectively protect her, but is also small enough to deal with any security risks. No sooner had the thought crossed his mind than the obvious solution became clear. He reached up to his ear and activated his comm, hoping that the others would agree with his decision. Aegis, I need you to work on some security upgrades for the agency. We're going to have a guest staying with us for a little while. This is the end of the video. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Also don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you don't miss an upload.